Good go. All right. Would you call to order the Tuesday, October 18th, Town of Colonial Beach Planning Commission meeting? Has everybody had a chance to review the agenda?
Yes.
Will you do one, Rick? Any changes or amendments?
Just a request that we consider maybe reordering this a little bit. Our discussions on definitions seem to go on ad nauseum, and I've already teed up a few picky points that I want to go through. So perhaps for the sake of kindness, maybe we could move the cup before the Article 20 conversation.
Any objections?
No.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and do the CUP hearing first, and then do the definitions of the public hearing second. Any other changes or amendments? Can I get a second to adopt the agenda as amended?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So, as amended. Do we have any public comment on non-hearing related matters?
No.
No? Then we'll go ahead and open the public hearing for the CUP 04 2022 application for 509 Colonial Avenue, operation of a service establishment. So we'll open the public hearing for comment at 5:36. Okay. First, we have Michael Weil. Hope I didn't butcher that too bad, sorry.
Well, I guess I spoke at the last meeting, so I don't need to say a lot. But if you have any questions or concerns, I would be happy to answer them for you. I'm the owner of the building, and I strongly support Patricia in her efforts to open this business. I appreciate the council's support.
Thank you. If we have any questions of the applicant or yourself, we'll go ahead and let you guys come up and address this once the public comments finished and we have our discussion. If you need any clarification, by all means, we'll include you in that conversation. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Patricia Johnson?
I'm glad I was here before. So I'm super excited about doing this. I've had a lot of people in the area support, call me, and they're interested very much in having the service here. Especially people who come here for vacation times and things like that. So I'm hoping that, it gets approved and we get a nice place for Colonial Beach people to come and relax and enjoy their weekends, or just have a great place to come and, work out lower back pain, knees, lots of, issues with their bodies, instead of going all the way to Fredericksburg or Richmond and places like that. And being small, I think would be very helpful for not being a big company or anything like that, because it's just me, and I'll have one or two people helping me, and that'll be pretty much it.
Fantastic. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us in relation to the permit or the narrative?
No, I mean, I just think that, it's going to be an added service to the community. I definitely want to help with, services in the area, helping with the kids, doing lots of, other things to help the Colonial Beach grow, especially education and VA.
Well, thank you very much. And if we have any additional questions or commentary, we'll for sure have you back up.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and close public comment at 5:39. Staff like to read in or just a little background and or recommendations on conditions.
Sorry, operating electronically tonight, it's not.
Let's try the next one. It's one or the other. You can't ever figure out which one.
It says it's working, but.
You got a green light, but there's no noise.
Right.
This one better?
Thank you.
Let me get to, again, I'm sorry, we're operating completely electronically. Okay. So I did review this, this application with the zoning administrator, and we together developed, the staff recommendation, which is, to permit or to recommend, approval of this use. It does require a conditional use permit in the C1 zoning district. However, we are aware that there are other businesses of similar nature in this district. So, that being true, and then given the nature of the business, staff does support this application. And with the conditions listed on page at the bottom under staff recommendation on page 46 of your packet, but those being minimal, just talking about hours of operation, separate entrance for the access. But otherwise, is this the right one? Hold on. Yeah. External illumination shield so that there's no glare for, in the event that there is external illumination added to this particular building for this use, to ensure that it does not disrupt, if you will, neighboring properties. And I skipped over number 1, but that's just the standard, the conditional use permit shall run with the land. That's a restatement of the law is basically what that is. So it's not really a condition, but it's a restatement of the law. I will say there has been nothing but support for this application. And again, there are similar uses in this locality. So staff does recommend that you recommend to the town council approval of this conditional use permit, again, with those conditions.
Thank you. Discussion?
Well, I just wanted to add that, I appreciate the patience that Ms. Johnson and Mr. Kyle has shown as we work through this process. So I appreciate that very much.
And I would like to, I think I want to go ahead and make a motion that we recommend approval of this to the town council.
I'd like to add an amendment to that it include the staff recommendations as well.
Absolutely. So I,
Yes.
Sure. The recommended conditions.
yes, I mean,
Mr. Christensen, do you have any thoughts or discussion?
I have a quick question. You probably mentioned, but I was wondering if the RC district would also allow this kind of use.
I can check, I'm not sure. By the way, the item number 3 is not applicable to this. That was left from a template in error. So I would suggest in the.
okay.
All right. It is, and that was,
Number 3, yeah, and on the plat, it indicated a single
yes, it is, and that was an error.
holdover, yeah.
Yes, it was. From a template. We had like 2 or 3 different versions of this, so the one that got pulled over was the one that had that in it, so apologies. So let me see, Mr. Christian.
Well, that's going on. Mr.
Okay, so in, Ms. DeBernard says that in the RC district, this type of use is a permitted use, not a conditional use.
Okay.
I'd be curious to know why that is.
Probably the difference between RC and C, yeah.
What's that?
We don't really know, and so we're looking at that now, and that is the chart that we forwarded to you, where it lists all of the uses in the town and then the districts and whatnot. So I would commend to you perhaps that we start looking at those in each district, the uses that, and what makes sense now as to be permitted uses versus conditional uses. Because of course, the next an upcoming conversation will be, where do we add mobile vending in that? So as we look at that, we should look at all of them. Mr. Mack, to our earlier conversation about when we open up an article, that we look at all of the uses.
Yeah, agreed. My just going off my own version of logic, as to why this might be an already allowed use in resort commercial is if you had a hotel that had a massage therapist on staff, maybe, I mean, that would make sense to me. It's not unheard of in other places. So that's the only reason why, that's the reason why I can think of why it would be an allowed use there.
I think that's interesting. Mr. Chairman, may I ask one of the people who commented, I'd like to know from Mr. Byler and Ms. Johnson, exactly why they chose the spot that they chose, the exact location, and, the pros and maybe the cons, if there are any, and just, if you could put in words why that particular location seemed nice to you.
Well, honestly, I bought the building primarily to do the Model Railroad Museum and Shop. And as we looked at the space and looked at the opportunity to subdivide it and add a second business to the facility. And at that point in time is when I got in contact with Patricia, who elected to rent this space from me. So that's where that came from. Now, if you want to discuss why you think it's a good spot.
Well, I think it's a good spot because it's nice. It's a quiet spot for one. It's not, a lot of traffic, behind it and around it. So it's kind of quiet. It's not like it's a place of a lot of noise or anything like that. I had actually looked at the building to purchase it before he had. And when I came there and saw, I think I just saw you there or something, right? And I came up and I was like, oh, what's happening with the building? And he told me that he was going to rent the back out. And I was like, oh, can I talk to you? I said, I'm trying really hard to find a place down here. So I just think that it's a good spot. Plus too, with the Eagles next door, there's, it's just, there's people that come and go there. So it's not like it's a secluded spot somewhere away. And it's just, I just think that it's a good spot for what I'm going to be doing. So.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for choosing Colonial Beach.
Yeah.
And
Well, of
I'm
course,
just always interested in what attracts people to come and to
Can I add something else too?
do what they do.
So I grew up in Old Town Alexandria, which is very colonial. And I love Colonial Beach, just because I remember so much growing up in Old Town Alexandria, the feel and the old bricks and, things like that. So Colonial Beach for me is it's very comfortable here. I like the way the feel is here. And I don't want to change, that feel. I just want to offer, health and wellness and a place to relax or, get
Excellent, thank you very much.
If I could add one little side note of my own is that, I've been coming to Colonial Beach for close to 20 years. And I'm remodeling a house right now. I'm going to be a resident here in about 4 months. So.
Just seeking a clarification from staff about, so this falls into, we're going through this process because it falls into a service category, is that why this is triggered.
Service establishment, yes.
Do medical practices also fall into services? Because I'm sort of wondering about, like, we're calling this like a massage, really, this is really more of a therapy use than I mean, to me, it aligns more with a physician sort of use, and I'm just trying to figure, I want to make sure that we're putting this through the right process and that we're categorizing this correctly, and that it's not another use that's already would be allowed, and that, because if it's an allowed use, we don't need to refer this.
So I'm looking at C1, and which permitted use are you referring to?
So that's what I was wondering about. So is services including everything, including like all sort of, if it was a straightforward, like this is a clinic, a medical clinic, right? A doctor's office, right? Would that go through the same process or are all those things considered services? Because I understand sort of like it's sort of different than a spa, I guess, is sort of, because the way you've described your business before us does not sound like a spa. It sounds more like a therapeutic. And you haven't spoken to licensing or anything else that sort of you're operating under, but it may be sort of a different creature than. I just want to make sure we're not getting tripped up on the word massage and punching this through something we don't need to.
Well, that begs the question, if your goal is to relieve a burden and to make this, to potentially fall into a category that would be a permitted use as opposed to a conditional use, I would again ask, which permitted use would you refer to? Because I don't see medical in there at all.
Okay, that's what I was asking for clarification on, about whether
So,
all of those.
But your
uses-
real question was, is medical, does that fall in the category of service establishment? And I would also say no to that. But that doesn't really fix or hinder the issue, really. It doesn't change this result.
You're saying if you put it under a different, more appropriate category, it would still go through the conditional use process.
Well, it depends. That's why I'm asking, which category are you suggesting? Because
Yeah, I don't know
medical
if this
clinic is a
category
different.
That's what I was asking for your recommendation.
Okay, so
Where
the
they-
permitted uses in C1 are commercial accessory structures, arts, crafts, and photography studios, automobile service stations, brew pubs, car washes, civic, social, or fraternal facilities, churches and places of worship, commercial nanobreweries, community centers and open spaces, convenience stores, daycare centers, financial service establishments, live-work units, marinas, microbreweries, museums. Outdoor storage of merchandise and/or outdoor display of merchandise is permitted, provided that the outdoor storage and/or display is ancillary to a use permitted by right, and provided that the requirements of Section 8-12 of the zoning ordinance, which is contained in Appendix A of the Colonial Beach Town Code, are met. Private or public piers, professional offices, public utilities, buildings and facilities, restaurants, mini warehouses, and self-storage warehouses, small retail establishments not exceeding 12,000 square feet, vehicle major service establishments, vehicular sales, service and repair establishments, tattoo establishments. And yes, whenever an application or an applicant, an individual comes into our office, one of the first things we look at is this a permitted use? And we determined that it was not, that it didn't fall into any of those categories. So then the question becomes, can we get you in as a conditional use? And honestly, it took a little bit of maneuvering, but we felt like that would be much quicker than trying to get a text amendment through, because that's a two-step process by its very nature. So we felt we were trying to get this through as quickly as possible to help these people, anticipating that there would be no objection to the use. So that's why we tried real hard to find a conditional use that would fit. And frankly, it took a little bit of maneuvering of interpretation, but we felt like it was fair. And the zoning administrator and I both looked at it, and Kaylin, and we all concluded that we felt like it was fair. So that's how we ended up on service establishment.
Thank you for that analysis.
I'm fine with proceeding in this matter, but it seems like we've talked in several different evenings about the interest in attracting more medical services to the town and deficiencies that we have, and it seems like we're going to fix this as we're moving forward on other matters about trying to make this pretty painless as far as the category, but I'm fine with proceeding with this for this particular matter.
Okay. So we've got a motion on the table to adopt with staff recommendations, striking number 3, so taking 1, 2, and 4. Is that, do we have any further discussions? Okay, we got a second, okay.
Just, can I have another question for staff? The part about, keep your lighting to yourself, or the boilerplate that goes with that, is that put in there because we don't have these general stipulations in the town regulations, so we have to?
That's a very common, condition that you'll see in, I would dare say, most, conditional use permits. It's just a protection for neighbors. It's very similar, and we don't have it in this one, but it's very similar to buffers. That's a very normal, common.
But it doesn't exist generically in
No.
the town's rule. Thank you for clarification. That's all.
Okay, so go ahead and take a roll call. Mr. Christian?
Aye.
Mr. Mack?
Aye.
Mr. Knuckles?
Aye.
Ms. Leonard?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Thank you very much. We're making recommendation to council adopt as amended here with staff recommendation. Okay, that draws the conclusion for CUP hearing. Go ahead and start the public hearing on Article 20 definitions update at 5:56 p.m. So we have no public comment signups. Is anybody interested in speaking on this? Gallery? Nope. All right, good to go. Moving along to staff recommendation.
Could you please, for the record, Mr. Chairman, open the public hearing and then close the public hearing?
Okay, we're opening public comment for public hearing. And there is no signups and no appetite from the gallery, so we're now closing the public comment for the public hearing. Point of order, thank you. So now,
So the printout you have in front of you, Mr. Knuckles, thank you for, we have, once again, our switch over in our files, our new file sharing, you got the wrong printout, but you did have previously the definitions for mobile vending and mobile vending courtyard. So mobile vending vehicle, I think it is, but in any event, you have that in front of you. The definition for, and I'm just pointing out a couple of the changes, and then Mr. Knuckles, I believe, has some other questions or potential
Don't
suggestions.
mean to interrupt, but which one of these?
Yeah, which one?
Yes, I'm confused too.
Not the, it's the one that's just the
By itself.
definitions, not, yes, by itself, just the
I
definition, not the one.
In May, so that's what was confusing about that.
And it was changed on one version, and that's why I'm saying it's, our stuff gets saved everywhere. So, yeah, the bottom will be changed, and that'll be fixed. That's just the footer.
Sorry about the interruption.
No, thank you. So the other issue is the definition of boardwalk. So that was left in just for, publication purposes or public hearing purposes. We did go back and look at that to see where that was used, that term, and it's really not. So we're, and it really shouldn't be because it's a public space, if you will. It's not really subject to zoning. The only time it's really used is the vendor program, which is not in a part of the zoning ordinances. It's part of the town code. So, my recommendation at this point is that is not needed as a definition. If later it becomes needed, it could be defined, but then that begs the question, exactly where do you want the parameters and the limits to be and that sort of thing? And that's why it was left blank initially, because we wanted to see where we needed it, but we don't. Not in the zoning ordinance so my suggestion as of today is to remove it.
I don't see it in this clean copy, is it?
Yes, it's been removed.
That's, okay. Correct. That's, I don't see it. so-
Yes, so that's it. It was in the one that was in your agenda packet.
Got it.
It is still in that highlighted, but this clean copy has been removed, and the two separate pieces that you were provided last time, separate definitions just on a separate piece of paper of mobile vending vehicle and mobile vending courtyard. So those are now in here and boardwalk is removed.
I wanted to speak to the definition of the affordable housing. And I talked last time about how this state code reference is to affordable dwelling units.
Yes.
And that's a specific program that jurisdictions throughout the state have, whereby they will work with the developer, the town staff and the community will work with the developer to set aside affordable housing dwelling units.
Right.
But that's not a definition of affordable housing, because affordable
Well, there's a
housing
definition of workforce
could be-
housing in these definitions as well.
Yes, I saw
Yes.
that, but affordable housing is not the same thing as workforce housing.
Correct.
They're two different things.
Well, we incorporated the definition of urban, from the Urban Dictionary that Mr. Mack.
It's very well done, and I really like it. I just have one little change on that workforce housing definition, but for the definition for affordable housing, if you attach it to this Virginia code for affordable dwelling units, it limits that. And we could have nonprofits, we could have employers, we could have churches that want to go forward with affordable housing, and they're not necessarily building affordable dwelling units. They're building affordable housing. Well, I know it's a very, confusing definition, but affordable housing is not the same thing as affordable dwelling units as it's described in that section of the statutes.
Yeah, well,
So this
So
definition is
we
straight
could
out of
fix
the
it.
code.
We
It's-
could fix it just by taking out that code reference.
So this was already in your definitions. If you want to do density bonuses, it has to follow the state code. Because there are constitutional ramifications and constitutional limitations to giving a benefit to one developer and not to another. And you can only give that in accordance with the program that is established under state code.
I thought about that
If
too.
you want to provide incentives that relate to town money, for example, if you want to make your water and sewer connection fee zero to encourage something, like for workforce housing, for example, you can do that you can define that however you want. But if you want a density bonus program, and from previous discussions, I had heard that maybe that was the direction we wanted to go. If you want to do that, you must follow the carve out that is provided in state code. Otherwise, it could be struck, and it should be struck because it would be unconstitutional.
I thought about that, and I think a way to address that is by putting a definition of affordable dwelling units. So that ADUs are an additional definition beyond affordable housing.
So we would want, I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. We would want a definition for affordable housing, affordable dwelling units, and workforce
Yes,
housing.
yes.
So what would
But do they
affordable
all say
dwelling?
the same thing? Because
No,
the workforce housing is very similar with a couple of other caveats in it to the affordable housing.
well, affordable housing can reach as far as 30% of the area median income. But you'll notice that the workforce housing begins at 60% to 120%. So that's why those two definitions are important. But according to what Ms. Shea said, Giles, is that we need to have the definition so that we are allowed by state code to add greater density to a site. So I just recommend that we be clear on this, since, this is our first pass through as a commission on definitions. I'd like for us to include that.
So-
I saw affordable dwelling unit previously at some point. Was that in the town, in the definitions before, or in zoning definitions?
I don't think that was part of Vicky's discussion from last time, where we were going back and forth on what the state code said. The specific section that's referenced to.
Well, this is, so 15.2, 2305 and the subsequent provisions are of the affordable dwelling unit. And I'm looking for where I found the definition. I'm not smart enough to have just made it up.
I did, I reviewed for the second time this definition. And, in my past working on ADUs in Falls Church and also in Arlington, it's a particular type of affordable housing tool that's available for jurisdictions and developers to contribute to and for the preservation of affordable housing. And the creation of it.
It is, so what we had talked about before was the incentives being density bonuses.
Variances, possibly,
No,
no.
that's not, that area of law is very specific and very narrow. And it cannot be given ahead of time by right. But density bonuses and local incentives, like I talked about, like expedited permits, reduced permit fees, reduced connection fees, that sort of thing. If there are additional incentives, I'm trying to, I don't care how many definitions you want to add, but I'm trying to think ahead to the next step about where they would land, where they would end up, where they would be used. So.
If we were to look at maybe development, maybe a small development using community development block grant money, they could go as far as in terms of serving very low income, and that would be the 30%. So I think that trying to be clear on what we're talking about is going to be helpful to us down the road. So if we can more clearly establish that affordable housing is defined in our definitions, we have workforce defined, I think that it's going to help us, to clarify that.
Now, with the understanding that I absolutely want to have workforce and affordable housing in town, when you start talking about very affordable, or whatever your last term was that you used, where do we start encroaching on subsidized in reference to that?
Well, subsidized would be where a developer would apply and or a nonprofit development corporation would apply for specific money, and that it would receive funds to tie it to the unit to keep it affordable for a period of time.
And the people being able to apply to reside in those units have to be of a certain
Income.
Right.
Yes.
And so where does that differ between very affordable, and workforce?
Well, one of the things that we found in our comprehensive plan when we did a housing assessment here for Colonial Beach, we found that something like at that time in 2019, that nearly 1 out of 10 units in town are subsidized for residents that are only receiving 30% or less of the area median income. So that analysis really revealed that we have a sufficient number, at that time, of subsidized units. Workforce housing is different. So those are two different types of housing resources.
I understand that
yes.
entirely, but is the mark 30%? Because if the mark is 30%, we have two things in the definitions now that denote 30%, workforce and affordable.
Well,
So
I didn't see the
where does
30% in the workforce though.
That's the first line.
It's 60.
It's the very first line, says 30%. It
Really?
says housing for which the gross cost includes utilities is not more than 30% of the gross income.
Understand what the semantics are for.
Yeah, see, when I reviewed it, the one that we got in the packet.
So
Um,
on this one,
So,
It
Yeah.
specifically talks about that 30%, and then I'm going through the code that's referenced here. And then the only thing that it talks about that's administratively different is the establishment of a local housing authority within the governing body or its designee. So that's why I'm trying to understand what are you asking for that is different or in excess of affordable housing?
So
That's it's right here.
when we met last time,
Uh-huh.
we defined a workforce housing as housing that would serve residents at 60 to 120% of the area median income. So this 30% reference here is confusing. And
But that's an entirely different program. That's my point. That's an entirely different program and it's mandated or regulated under the state code. That is entirely different from the goal that I heard from from the commission last time about establishing different incentives for workforce housing, which is fine. They just cannot include density bonuses.
Well,
So what are you
you know,
advocating for
when-
that's different from what's here?
I did not see that the workforce housing included 30% area median income because that's typically not what you see. It's like I said, when you read the definitions from the ULI, it was 60 to 120% of the area median. It didn't dip down to the 30%.
Right, so that's why we have two different definitions.
So the definition of affordable housing should include that 30%
Okay.
and not workforce housing.
I see.
You're correct.
I see, let me,
So
So
we're good with what
we can add a definition for affordable housing,
which is
We've already
here.
got that in
yes, and this definition
there. It should be listed.
of affordable housing here, this is the one that we're going through,
So the code,
had the state code reference to it.
the state code reference for that is affordable housing dwelling units ordinance,
Yes.
Yes, exactly,
Quite rightly.
right.
which is.
Quite
30%.
literally, it is an ordinance that allows jurisdictions to work with the developer. So it's a specific type of mechanism for bringing affordable housing online. So what I'm saying is that aside from this affordable dwelling units ordinance, we might have, the reason I think that a definition of affordable housing in itself is important is because we might have employers that want to come in and provide affordable housing. They maybe not be seeking the variances or the bonus density for the development. We have churches that might want to contribute to that, or a nonprofit housing corporation could want to. And so outside of the affordable housing dwelling ordinance, we need a separate definition for affordable housing.
I still don't understand why.
Because
Because the definition
here-
would still be the same,
Yeah,
they just wouldn't apply for the special treatment from the government.
right, it literally talks about everything that you're saying in the state ordinance.
Oh, it does. See, that's the confusing part of that. An ADU, which is the ordinance that we're, have cited in this, in the state code here, is a specific type of mechanism to bring affordable housing online. It is not a definition of affordable housing.
But we,
And I've said enough. I mean, I don't want to belabor it.
no, I get it, but I think we've defined it specifically right here
In workforce housing?
in affordable housing.
Well, what I'm saying is that is, the code is referencing one mechanism for
I'm
bringing
not worried
affordable.
about the mechanism, I'm worried about the definition.
Right, so how does that affect what
So
the
not looking
zoning
at the
is? Not
mechanism,
looking
looking just at the definition, it looks to me
from the zoning
like it
perspective.
defines affordable housing.
Right, not from a programmatic or an implementation of administration or anything like that, but just from
A
the
definition
zoning
standpoint.
ordinance, set the definition, land use compatibility. Is there conflict?
Well, I wouldn't want to have, an agency be confused by our definition. And, so that's why I wanted to separate it. But I don't want to belabor it. I think we talked about it at our last meeting. We've talked about it here. If it should become a problem, I think we have an opportunity to come back and revisit it. So how's that?
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Correct that affordable housing is a programmatic concept. An ADU is a thing,
Yes,
and the
Yes.
workforce
Yes.
housing is also, is a category, right? It's not a structure.
right, right.
So an ADU is a structure, the other two things are programs. So that's why you have all three definitions, because the affordable housing or the workforce housing could specify ADUs with specific characteristics. Does that make sense?
Yes, but those characteristics are already defined within the state code for ADU, right? So defining what affordable housing is, not the structure of it, but affordable housing is the 30% mark, like not to go into all the extra words, right?
So the question was about like, why does it have a zoning application? ADUs have a zoning application because they're things, and things have specificity geographically, right? And the other things are programs,
Or they're also-
which can relate to zones, but they're not buildings. So if you
Right,
have
but
both
services,
things in the definition,
services also
Then you can-
relate to zones and not to buildings.
So then, by extension, as we'd like to do the next step analysis is where in the code would we put ADUs?
Right under, affordable dwelling units,
No,
another,
no, not in the definition, in the chapter sections, where would they live?
well, there are ordinances in other jurisdictions.
Well, I understand the
Yes.
law.
In the
So
ordinance
I
section.
think there's programs in other jurisdictions, not necessarily ordinances depicting that. So like
Well,
your
Falls
point,
Church has an ordinance.
Falls Church has a program
Mhm.
that I just looked up that
Mhm.
illustrates those type of things that's in the state code, basically regurgitating information to say, this is the program. I think the definition of affordable housing per that is the same across the board, because I've looked at other jurisdictions trying to find out what their affordable housing listing is, and it's essentially the same thing. And then they point to the code as part of their program to find, like what you were saying, when people come and they're looking for the density bonuses, that kind of stuff. The program itself identifies what they can do in order to get the incentive.
Right, so that's Loudon, Fairfax, Falls Church,
Yeah,
and they're all programmatic here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're all affordable unit is a reference to a program at ADUs in the law that's the 25.
Yeah,
25-2.
correct.
Right, which is the other law reference, and then,
But they are not an ordinance unto themselves.
correct. They are a program usually administered by a housing authority.
Well, in Arlington, it's an overlay. So it can be an ordinance, an overlay, at a specific community.
It's not necessarily.
So- Although we're not trying to bloat the code, does it seem reasonable that all three may have some applicability as we're moving forward, working on these concepts? And is there any downside to including all three? Right, so if we might use them, and it's not gonna harm, as long as we get the wording right.
So the only downside I see is kind of what you said, blue, right? Because this leads to other things that we don't have specifically defined in our definitions that we can reference through pointing at state code, right? There are other areas where we've done that within the definitions. So if we have the definition for affordable housing and an affordable dwelling unit falls under affordable housing,
Yes,
then pointing to the state code that defines what an
I like
affordable
that.
dwelling unit is covered by doing exactly what we've done here. We've defined what affordable housing is, and then we pointed to the state code, which under affordable housing defines what an affordable dwelling unit is. So they're still linked together. We just don't have to pull it out of state code and put it into our definitions.
So that's where I was missing this. I thought that can you give me the code references? I thought the code only referenced it, didn't define ADUs.
Right, so,
So.
It
Yes.
does define them, and that's the
Virginia
definition that you have in front of you.
Right.
Mhm.
15,
The affordable
11,
dwelling, affordable housing,
No,
the
no,
other-
affordable
Affordable
housing.
dwelling units.
Affordable ADU.
that's the
Yes.
same thing.
Same definition.
In
yeah.
the code, in the state code, it says it's the Affordable Dwelling Unit
Well-
Program, and that definition comes right out of that. And the state code, it talks, you can, it defines affordable, and then it talks about housing programs, but it's all under, you can call it the Colonial Beach Affordable Housing Ordinance, you can call it the Colonial Beach Affordable Housing Dwelling Unit Ordinance, it's all the same. Now, if you want a different definition, that begs the same question as the workforce housing definition. If you want, so my question right now would be, if you want a different definition and call it affordable housing dwelling unit ordinance, dwelling units, what would that be defined as? Because if you want a definition just like you did for workforce housing, what are you gonna do with it?
Well, like you said, the affordable housing dwelling units are already defined in the state code, so we don't have to look for a definition of that. But we do,
Well, you do have to pull it in, because the way, this is enabling legislation as opposed to mandatory
See, what's
legislation.
confusing.
So enabling legislation in the state code is legislation that says to localities, you may adopt an ordinance that says this. For example, in the subdivision section, or let me take the zoning ordinance section, both of them actually, the zoning ordinance section and the subdivision ordinance section. In the state code, there are code sections that say your zoning ordinance must include these provisions. And then the next one says your zoning ordinance may include these types of things. Subdivision ordinance is the same way. This, and those are the ones that say your ordinance may include these things. It's called enabling legislation. And what that means is then you can consider that as a locality, and you may adopt something that looks like that, but you don't have to. The affordable housing dwelling unit ordinances is the exact same thing. It is enabling legislation. So you have to, if you want that in your locality, you don't have to have it, but if you want it, you may incorporate that into your local ordinance. So yes, you have to include that if you want these results. However, in doing that, you may not deviate from the rules that the state, you may not violate, you may not contradict the rules that the state tells you must do. You certainly can't contradict those. And you can only go beyond what they say you may do if it is not in contradiction and it is not a violation of some other type of right. For example, I mentioned the constitutional rights earlier, that would be problematic. So this is enabling legislation. So yes, even though it is set out in the state code, if you want to have an affordable housing dwelling unit benefit in your look in Colonial Beach, you have to include that and incorporate that and adopt it.
Okay.
And if you want to have something different, we've already included workforce housing, which is something different. And again, that can be a benefit and to a different category of people because of the way it's defined using the Urban Dictionary definition. And you can create another one if you want, but those would be related to local benefits. And so that was my question: what other local benefits? I mean, you can create 5 more categories if you want.
Yeah, maybe a way of fixing it, a simple way would be just to retitle this definition heading affordable housing dwelling unit. And then it would be clear.
Yeah, I think that's perfect, because that's pretty much what the state code
Yes.
does anyway.
Yes,
And
okay,
that keeps us from saying it's just a affordable dwelling unit,
Right.
it's affording housing.
yeah,
Right, covers the
Because-
whole gamut.
thank you.
And it uses the state to define it instead of adding, good Lord, I don't know how many pages. Because I'm looking at it right now and I'm just continuously scrolling
It's always good
through.
to have definitions,
Yeah,
clear.
no, yeah, no,
Yeah.
definitions are great. I think we just, like Will was saying, we want to get the right definition in here without loading our own thing. And I think we've just found
A simple way.
the perfect way to do that. I think and I want to thank you for being persistent in it and
Thank
understanding.
you, I appreciate that.
I'm not.
It's hard to,
I'm not
push
trying to
forward.
poke you in the eye, right? But, we're working together to find the right spot here, right? So we're not working against each other. We're working with each other.
That's
awesome. Thank you.
Awesome.
So you want it to read affordable housing dwelling unit,
units.
Okay. And just so you know,
the affordable housing that was already in your definitions. So
Yeah, and it's
it wasn't
very
a
old.
change, it wasn't something, you
Yeah,
know what I mean? It wasn't that anybody did, it was just.
And like you said, the definition of affordable housing is all over the map, so, thank you.
Anything else?
I do have one thing under, I swear I'm gonna get off this topic here really quick. Under the workforce housing, I know we were talking about, maybe striking the 30% thing
Mhm.
out of it.
Out of the workforce housing definition, well, if you strike it, then
I don't-
the formula doesn't,
I don't know
yeah,
if
the
we want
formula
to.
doesn't work. You have to have some kind of, you can choose 50%
No.
or something, but you have to have something.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add to that is that, we have it here, median income, I think is short for area median income. And it's adjusted for Westmoreland County because we are part of the metropolitan statistical area, which includes, income levels for Northern Virginia, very high income levels. But it's adjusted for Westmoreland County.
Yeah,
So I
it's-
just wanted to put in there,
It does say median income for
Right.
Westmoreland County.
for.
Right,
that
because
the
you can
adjusted-
drill down.
It should say adjusted median income, and that's how HUD defines it as well. And I've sent everyone a copy of HUD's new guidelines, I sent it this afternoon, that describes that. And so, Westmoreland has it on their county webpage, and that's where I picked it up.
Yeah, you
But
can pull
it's
it down
through
by
HUD.
locality,
Yes,
by
yeah.
locality.
So maybe we add adjusted.
Yes.
for median. And
Yep.
the only other thing I have is if you look directly above that, it says income owed the household.
And the
So
word
we either
household.
need to put an apostrophe or an F.
Yes, that's right, I saw that.
I have the
Typo.
And
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Allison pointed out that the word household is misspelled as well.
There you go. So- And I didn't catch that one.
I didn't either.
Yes, we will. And I think when I inserted, mobile vending, I flipped, they're not in alphabetical order. We fixed all the other stuff in alphabetical order, but that I think I flipped, so I think I need to reverse this.
Just a question to the chair, since we're, before we were in sort of broad discussion mode, and this is a hearing, so I'm trying to find some efficient procedural way as we go through these, as we get agreement or potentially lack agreement on a particular line, that we know what we've actually done. Do we have the ability, like as we're editing this, can you change stuff on a screen, or can we see actual language? Because I've been confused at points before where I thought we've agreed on things, and then the later product is not actually, this is the last stage, right? Potentially we're voting on this. So what's the process we can come up with? Because,
Well, if we're not on the screen, maybe we just review what you have. And if she reads out what she has, that she's written of what we're gonna change.
I mean, do
I don't
we
think
have an
she's-
agreement that not the old code, but the staff product is the thing? I guess that's the point to start from, right? We're not
Yes.
modifying, these aren't amendments to the existing code, these are amendments to this document.
Yes, to the
Definitions, yeah.
Okay, I think it's a good starting point. And
The
then,
May 22 date on the bottom left, that's gonna get updated.
yeah, and then maybe potentially as we, exhaust the language of an item, that we could just quickly come to an agreement on it, or like a mini vote or something. I don't know what the right way to do this is, but it seems like,
Yeah, that's
We need a
fine. If
process.
We can gather some consensus, right, we can take just a nod and make sure that everybody's in agreement with as we move along. So sufficient.
like a quick UC sort of thing, right? Yeah, okay.
So,
Might I suggest that when a conversation's been had and she's made recommended changes from y'all, she rereads that and then initials it, so that way y'all know that this is the copy that you're working on, and that's gonna be the final, and then y'all can all agree to what
That's
she's
a good way.
handwritten and approved by initialing the item.
I'm in favor of it.
Yes, awesome.
Do you want me to read where we are at the moment? What I have? All right, at the moment, I have the footer needs to be, of course, changed to October. I have on page 2, under affordable housing, it will now be defined, the definition or the term being defined will now be affordable housing dwelling unit. And I have under workforce housing, it will now read, housing for which the gross cost, including utilities, is not, well, let me start over. Housing for which the gross cost, comma, including utilities, comma, is not more than 30% of the gross income of, corrected to be OF, the household, where the household, correcting the spelling, total gross income is between 60 and 120% of the adjusted median income for Westmoreland County.
Yeah, that's what she did. Yeah.
For Westmoreland County, comma, Virginia, as determined by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Everybody get a nod? Mario, you good? Same page so far?
I was not tracking fast enough. We did get the word adjusted
It did.
inserted. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
And the only other thing I think we have is the flip-flopping of the mobile vendor and mobile
Yes.
vendor courtyard, vehicle in the courtyard.
Yes.
Does household exist as a definition somewhere? To know like what comprises the household, who you're adding up when you're doing the household income?
Oh, I'm sure HUD has a definition of that,
Yes,
Yeah.
that's,
and this will cover that.
I noticed we do a lot with the word families. I didn't know if we
Yes.
also had.
yeah, that's all federal program and state program stuff. Okay, Mr. Knuckles, you said you had a couple other thoughts.
Yes, let me get back to that.
This has been very productive.
List.
Keep this very relevant.
Were you done? Before
I
jumped in,
was,
just wanna make sure
those are
you
the
were
two
done.
things that I noticed.
I had coastal A&E, which it comes up on page 6, I think.
I got 20-6.
Um,
The OA, maybe it's 20-5.
Yes.
Yeah,
Coastal A
coastal
zone.
A zone.
um,
I thought that was one of those FEMA floodplain overlay definitions.
It is a FEMA definition.
Well, it's not the full FEMA definition, it's sort of like the shorthand version. And I shot you back some text about it. I'm trying to figure out whether, what do we want to do? Do we sort of, another shorthand version is where they talk about is the potential for raking waves and erosion to occur during base flood events, right? That's another, they have a couple like short versions. This is a short version. They have another shorthand version. The long version is the land, the landward, was it area landward of a V zone or landward of an open coast, let a map be zone. But I'm trying to get to the point of like, we could go with a really long handle version, but really what we're trying to indicate is that it just doesn't make much sense to me. Has been delineated as subject to wave heights between 1 and 3 feet, right?
Should we maybe reference the FEMA definition, just so we don't have to,
The long, yeah.
All
because
that
it's sort of
long junk
reference
in there,
the
like, as a,
the long wordy version of this.
is that a viable option?
Didn't they require that we incorporate it?
Yeah, they required that their definitions be incorporated, so, and this has all been approved by FEMA.
Okay, so
So it would have to, if we,
we don't have to reference their, because we have, there's a coastal, like you're saying, we have one of their short definitions for coastal A zone. We don't need to put a FEMA reference in there as long as we
we
have.
don't, this has all
one
been
of
sent
those.
to and approved by FEMA, so it would have to go back through that process if we start tweaking it now. And because it works hand in hand with their map, am I right? Yeah, it goes hand in hand with their map, so that zone is defined on the map.
I got you.
So can you clarify what you mean it went to FEMA?
Yeah, it had to be submitted for approval, and we were down to the wire, but we got approval back from FEMA to ensure, and this goes to flood insurance programs and that sort of thing, but it has to be approved by FEMA.
So this coastal A zone that we have in here, this definition that we have is one that they have signed off on for us to use in our definitions in our zoning.
Correct, because it ties to the
There.
map.
Gotcha. So,
Yeah, that's fine.
yeah, cool. Yeah, that sounds to me like they said, yeah, you used one of our definitions, you're good. So, I'm happy with that.
Okay.
Open space, I think is my next question. Which is, there's open space here first. Under
It's-
O, hopefully.
I think it's under community facilities, open spaces, right under coastal A zone.
The next one, yes.
There you go.
And my response was, to change to and/or. So that it is not limiting. I think your concern was that, and I think you're right, was that it would require all of those things be true. And, I think if I'm interpreting your comment
Yes.
correctly, that
Yes,
maybe not all of them are true. So if we changed it to and/or, that should take care of it.
So, and or other community, is that where the or goes?
Landscaped, lighted, it would be so it would be public land or a public structure, landscaped, lighted, and or publicly maintained, because it might be landscaped but not lighted.
I was just
Yes.
wondering where the
Yes,
or,
yes,
where in the phrase.
yes. Am I right, Mr.
that's what I
Davis?
was saying, is all conditions would have to exist.
Yes.
otherwise.
That is correct.
Convalescent center, which is the next page. Oh, sorry, are we all cool with the
Everybody
word?
good with that?
That last one. So so for coastal A zone, you got where we were with that one?
Yeah.
Okay, so for the community facilities, open spaces, we're just putting a /or here because it may be that not all of these things are.
Okay.
Okay, so we're good there. So the next one is what, convalescent, you said?
Convalescent center. You changed, include to provide, which again makes it look like, all of these services have to be included, in order to fit into that category.
Same thing, and or,
Um,
because I think the same concern would exist if it were include. I just felt like, the only reason I changed included to provide is because they provide these services. They don't.
Or should it be may provide? Because I think what you're getting at, Will, if I'm understanding it correctly, is you're saying that provide and then listing everything makes it look like they provide all of those services.
Yes.
But maybe
Correct,
they don't.
You
So
don't have
may
to, like,
provide,
does every facility have to have physical therapy? We
Right.
could actually mandate that in order to call it, but I don't think that's our intention.
No.
so maybe if we do may provide, it
And I
says
would
they-
suggest doing both, say may provide, and then at the end say and or other ancillary services. You're okay with that?
Yeah,
Just to further clarify.
you good with that, Bob?
Go ahead, nods, moving right along.
This is all, I guess it's questions that relate to how they impact several definitions. One is like dwelling, multiple family, or, these are all dwelling categories where we're adding in the concept of, the addition suggestion from staff is that short-term rental be added as a part of these definitions. And what I was, if I get back to my rationale here, that I was worried that if it essentially becomes, like, I have a house, and I rent out a room for a weekend, right? Is it now essentially equivalent almost to a duplex, right? I have two things happening within the same structure, because we've added this concept that it says shall include such units which are made available in short-term rentals, right?
Which
It's the added on language at the end that got added on to each of these.
Single family or the, okay.
Right? It says,
So what-
look under dwelling, look under dwelling multifamily, right? So it talks about how many, right, 3 or more, and that includes the things that are in there, right? Apartments, those are those things, and also shall include short-term rentals for any or all, or any portion of the same. So portion of the same means like a portion of a house, right? So if you're doing a room as opposed to a whole
Or the basement.
dwelling, does your, like, you know, your duplex turn into multifamily, right? Because one of the 2 duplexes has had somebody doing a short-term rental in one of the rooms for a weekend. Are you now not able to do that because then you become a multifamily, you're not in a different category, and that's not allowed in that zone? Is that the intention of doing this, or is this just a fluke of the way we've put in the part where that says shall include? Is that
It would not include the type of dwelling, but the intent behind doing this was just to say that wherever you have these uses, you may rent them as short-term rentals, because the objective, as I interpreted it, was to allow short-term rentals in the town, because people are doing it anyway, honestly. And it's a resort community, so, was to allow, without having to go back through every single zoning district and talk about where short-term rentals can be allowed. It's just, if you have a house or any sort of living arrangement, you may rent out all or a portion of it for short-term rental. And no, it does not change the type from, like, for example, from a single family dwelling to a multifamily dwelling. It just includes a short-term rental of a part of it, if that's what you choose to do. The only implication is if your income becomes high enough, then you would need to get a business license. But if it's low enough, you don't even fall into that category. So it has no consequence other than to encourage tourism.
So you were saying that the shall include, the shall include such unit language actually is not meaning that you're counting them in terms of occupancy. You're saying that it's essentially a permitted use. That's what this language does, is it allows this to say short-term rental is a allowed use within each of these categories. Is that what this?
Yes,
change?
if you have for example, a multifamily dwelling unit is allowed, then if you rent all or some of them for short-term rentals, that would then be allowed as well.
And can I ask why it didn't go with the attached but not detached? Why a short-term rental in the attached versions but not the detached version?
There, certainly it
It should
exists
be.
in that category now.
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah.
That was an oversight. Yeah, it
So
should.
we would,
I would think, unless y'all don't want it, but I would think that would be included.
I would think so. And so which definition are you specifying that? I'm just getting a
It's
little
the-
bit.
so like as you go down dwelling, single family attached,
Mhm.
we've added the clause there at the end, but if you go to dwelling, single family detached,
Okay.
the clause is missing, and I didn't know if that was a policy decision or just
Just
a.
an oversight.
No, it was the intent was to add it to all of them, and that one was overlooked.
Gotcha.
Okay, now it's starting to
Good.
make more sense.
I would think. So like,
Single family.
No, that would be an accessory dwelling unit.
No, what is a single family detached? Well,
Well,
It's a single family home. Yes.
yeah, it's a single
Yeah,
family home.
exactly.
Yeah, it's a single family home.
I'm thinking like attached garage or
Detached
garage.
garage, right, no.
Which we
Yeah.
don't allow
What do you mean?
for auxiliary dwelling units or that, so.
I think this now makes sense to me, that section now makes sense to me.
Yes,
Yeah, the dwelling unit and single family detached, neither of those have reference to short-term rental.
which one, I'm sorry?
Dwelling house.
Yeah, okay, never mind, that does in the middle. I was looking at the end for the clause, including short-term rental. Okay, so it's just dwelling, single family detached.
Detached, yes.
So we're looking to add, including something like, and including a short-term rental of all or any portion of the same.
That is precisely what I added at the end, after a comma.
Okey-dokey.
I'm good with that.
Yes.
You good with that, Bob?
We're changing the single family detached.
Just right at the end, what's the wording that you're adding in?
And including a
Comma.
short-term, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Comma, including the short-term rental of all or any portion of the same, period.
It's the same version
It's
as it
basically the
was.
same thing as the other ones that say, if you're doing any short-term rental, then that's part of the.
Still to be short-term. Okay.
In agreement on those changes? Can I move on?
Good.
Okay,
Yeah,
next,
it's fine.
page
I'm not
20.
sure how the wording's gonna be.
It's gonna be exactly the same as the last.
The one above
line, dwelling, full family.
Family.
And your comma, and including short-term rental of all or any portion of the same.
Okay.
So we're
So that
keeping,
it matches.
Yeah. Mr. Knuckles?
exist, page now 20-9, that is referenced at the bottom, at the top is existing construction. Just for the sake of this making sense that a normal human being, could we add something that in the definitions, it says something like, as it relates to FEMA or flooding issues, or, I know why this is here as a part of the FEMA language, right? But it, just say like what its intent is in terms of as a definition, it would be helpful, as though like it's, because that's its only applicability, I believe, right? We don't use this. When we reference existing construction, this is only for the sake of.
Right, since we don't oversee building code, yeah, it just.
Mr. Knuckles, on your email, I had added a note to say, to add a second sentence. In your old definitions, it had a second sentence, and I don't like, giving examples a lot of the time, because then that becomes confusing, like, why is this one included and something else isn't, and that sort of thing. But what I was, hold on, existing construction, suggest or thinking that might clarify would be to say, in other contexts, existing construction may also be referred to as existing structures and or pre-firm.
What was that last word?
Pre-firm, that was
Pre-firm,
that was the
okay.
old language, wasn't it?
Okay.
Didn't it
Yeah,
actually
and
mention?
that's a term it's a term of art, evidently out of FEMA's money.
Okay.
Yeah, so if we could, not divorce ourselves of all the weird FEMA language, just so we understand this is a flooding thing,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
I'm good with that.
Wetlands, which I guess I jumped all the way to the end of the document apparently.
Hang
Okay.
on. Yeah, we're gonna add that statement that she just made.
Which is in the existing code, we're going to undelete, I guess, right?
You're talking about existing construction.
Yes.
Okay. And the September 18th is something that FEMA has established.
Yes.
Okay. okay.
Yeah, it's
I
all
don't
FEMA,
like-
it's all
I don't
FEMA
like
wording.
dates like that.
It's all FEMA.
Yeah, it's all FEMA wording.
Yeah, okay. That should be changed.
Okay, and then we're rocketing to the end of the deck here to page.
27?
Yes.
Really had a ADD moment, went to the W's. So
Yes, go ahead.
these definitions, neither seem to, from what I can tell, reference both what the state tends to refer to them as vegetated and non-vegetated wetlands, right? We seem to have picked only one of those two. So it seems like we could either lean on the state, and they tend to say like, this is what a vegetated, and this is what a non-vegetated wetland is, and then they say like, and we include everything, and the state of West State was great, and they say, I don't know why they split it apart and then they collapse it back together. Or the feds, who tend to reference the Clean Water Act, Section 404, right? And then you sort of just lean on them because people are always fighting over jurisdictional things that relate to like waters of the United States law. But we could just say like that and us, right? We don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It just seems like we could either pick either the state reference or the federal reference. This is neither. This is a piece of the state piece.
I'm going to defer to Ms. DiBernardo on this one because evidently this is a whole class in and of itself.
Okay, so I chose the EPA definition, which is in there now. Wetlands are a very gray area in themselves. So in order to know exactly where a wetland is, it needs to be delineated. So I was just going with the overall EPA definition, not going between vegetated and non-vegetated. I mean, if you guys want to change it, that's fine, but that's what we would recommend.
The EPA definition, that's Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, but this is not inclusive of everything in Section 404. So rather than our language sort of being not entirely jiving with them, can we just reference, just actually reference the act? I think that sort of just simplifies the.
Is that a viable thing for us to do, to reference the Clean Water Act?
We do it all the time.
Not a specific section because those things change.
Can we just reference the Clean Water Act?
Yeah, as defined in the Clean Water Act.
Does that work?
Like the Chesapeake Bay Act. I mean, it's subject to change as well.
Are you
So literally as defined in the
Clean Water.
Clean Water Act, that's the verbiage we're going to.
Well,
Well, it's probably the Clean Water Act of, and there's a date associated with it, right?
Yeah, I don't like doing that either. I'd never recommend doing that because
Because
then
Every time it changes,
benchmarks
then
is
you
a
have to
big-
go back and fix it.
I got you.
Benchmarks it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's, it fixes it rather than allows it to flip the revision.
Okay, awesome, thank you. That's good.
But that's our intention, right, is we're just trying to be inclusive of everything that the state or the feds would include wetlands, right? We're not looking for a narrower definition, I would presume.
Yeah, because I know a couple of spots in town where they need to not be narrowly defined because people keep mowing them when they shouldn't,
And filling them in or trenching them.
whatever, right?
Yeah.
All those wonderful things that aren't.
No, it'd be really nice if they didn't build a house in the middle of it in the first place.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So. Let's see, duration sufficient to support. And the circumstances do support. The prevalence of vegetation. Concentrated soil conditions. And marshes. And some valleys. Okay. So I'm looking at section 404 of the Clean Water Act, and this is verbatim. And then it goes on to explain that the definition of wetlands as used by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. EPA since the 1970s. And it is verbatim of exactly what we have.
Awesome. So,
So it.
They literally state how to define it, and that's what we have on our definitions.
It's verbatim.
Go team.
yeah, I call that a win.
All right.
This isn't the full this is a field I've worked in for years. This is not the full definition.
This is how that
Well, I'm sure it's
But I'm
not,
saying,
but
like, you actually
I'm
get-
sure there are volumes
You
that
actually
talk
go,
about what
yeah, I'm saying
wetlands
you
are.
actually go to the
Yeah.
code that the plain language is referencing. It actually references, then you sort of get in this because it says like, well, how do we get to the definition for jurisdictional? And then that actually goes off the court, and the other piece goes off to EPA, and the other piece goes, right? It's just a big morass
There's a
of a
whole
lot of
manual for
legislation.
defining wetlands. So-
Yeah, that's constantly under litigation, so,
Yeah.
this is where I was hoping to say, like,
Then-
let's just not have our own definitions.
where it says how one
So I'm
section
saying, if we
404
do this without referencing an outside source, and we just say, this is our definition for wetlands, just puts us
Yeah,
there to sort of be in the same
So,
hole that,
yeah,
that the feds are in about always having to defend this. I'd like to just have this be a moving target of
let someone
wherever the
else
law is.
aim
have
for
us
the target
not
and
have
just
to.
point to that, to the Clean Water. Can we
So
do-
delete all of this language?
No. And just reference, at the end of it, just reference the Clean Water Act per the Clean Water Act or
I'd
whatever.
say as, you know, as defined in, you know, the Clean Water Act, right?
Whatever the best legal way of saying that would be to take our feet out of the fire.
Um,
We should trade
my
shares.
colleagues, cool with that, can we move?
I'm good with it. I think she's just trying to figure out exactly how she wants to word it.
I will look up, with your permission, and, if you want me to do it now, I will, or if you want to wait. Typically, the way to reference these things, and you will see, the way I cite code sections, it's the Blue Book citing, convention. That is the legal, that's the way the lawyer people do it.
I can wait. I'm not in a hurry.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
We
All right,
can
let me look.
move on to the
Yep,
next.
yep.
You want me to do it now?
Please and thank you, and then we'll continue with our sidebars. And do you have what, rolling back to?
Base flood.
Back to the beginning. Facebook. Just three.
So the first part makes sense. The second after the period about also referred to as the 100-year flood. We've tried to as a, professionally for, at least 20 years now, trying to get away from the language that relates to 100-year floods, 500-year floods, because it's caused so much horrible confusion with the public about thinking that it only occurs every 100 years or every 500 years. So it's better to say the 1% chance part. That's the part that's actually.
Strike that 100-year flood.
Yeah, because it just adds confusion.
It does.
So the first part is the part that's actually the real definition of is base flood.
This is a FEMA definition, so it came straight from them. And it was approved by them.
So this is another one of those.
I think it's referring to it as a 100-year flood. It helps us old guys because that's what we always called it before we understood.
Correct, but that's the thing, that's the part that
But it's a
that's
misnomer,
the
right,
part
yeah.
that the coastal hazard folks have been struggling with for decades now, which is folks that go like, well, we had one of these in 1960, so everything is safe, right?
Yeah, but I think the problem though.
And
is-
that's why we've sort of now changed that reference, and they've leaned more on the beginning part of the definition, and that's actually the term of art that everybody's been trying to push for public consumption, is what the first part of
But
it
the
says.
problem is, this one has been approved for us by FEMA. So if we change it, we have to go back to FEMA to get their approval.
Is that the case with
That's
this
what they're
definition?
saying,
Yeah.
this is a FEMA approved definition that we have in here. So much like that other one that we
So-
got straight from FEMA.
For this one, because like I said, it's caused enough public policy debacles that I've seen happen repeatedly. I would like to actually ask FEMA, can we just go with the short version as opposed to the IE reference language that is also referred to as, right?
Okay.
Because we don't actually reference the 100-year flood. That term does not exist anywhere else. So we don't need that phrase.
My only question would be how.
I would recommend keeping it as it is, and then the side question would be for her to send a request to FEMA to see if they approve it,
Right.
but not change the document.
Yeah.
If there's.
I'm good with that.
And if there's any of these other clarifications.
What's
that it could be.
What's in the, our existing code? Is that in there now?
Yes, this is part of the existing code that was adopted specifically for that.
So this is one that's already in there.
It's already in the towns one, right? It's not in just this river revision, it's already in there.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so you could ask for clarification, that'd be fine, if it's already in there. I thought we were adding this as an addition. On to H, historic structure.
Historic structure.
This seems to lean solely on the federal side of the definitions of what historic places and the National Register. There's a parallel state, since we're all trying to be in the state of Virginia. There's a state list under the, what is it called? the Virginia Landmarks Register. It follows the same process and procedure as the feds do. But in the state of Virginia, we have nationally listed things and state of Virginia listed things. This only makes reference to the feds. I think we ought to include both registries, since that's how the state.
Is
to look at it.
individually listed on the state inventory of historic places, the third bullet point?
It's, I think the term is the Virginia Landmarks Register.
And then the
Which is-
fourth one
which is-
has been certified either by an approved state program as determined by the secretary.
Correct, that's what I'm saying, the
Secretary.
The Secretary of the, that's all the federal side of things. So for the things that are on the state registry, they don't go through the feds. They go through an identical, essentially, list of rules. The state of Virginia itself approves its own registry. And then some of that stuff is actually duplicated and actually is on the federal registry as well, and that goes through DOI.
This is a FEMA definition also.
Historic
The
structure,
historic structure.
Which is why they're only referencing the feds.
that would
Okay,
all of a sudden make sense, and it's,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of other things that they've had go on with the Main Street program and the historic designation we've had downtown. So
that's where I was thinking with
I
this
got
one.
it.
with-
I understand where you're coming from for sure, but, okay.
I will point out that, under the third bullet, there should be a space between second line preservation, the line that starts preservation,
As,
program has.
Yeah, should be in space, gotcha.
So now I don't know whether or not this is sufficient to meet both purposes, the FEMA purpose. It's kind of like the reference earlier where I said like, hey, we ought to indicate like, this is a floody kind of thing, right? This is a watery thing. This is not.
Right.
But we don't use this anywhere except for in the floodplain overlay.
yeah, and I think that it would end up being in the architectural guidelines and some other third-party reference anyways.
And the reason they bring it up or have that in there is it talks about the rebuilding and that sort of thing in the floodplain overlay. So,
Yeah.
right, exactly. So that's the only place we use it. We don't really.
Okay.
Amount of edits.
And work the wetlands definition, the proper citation to insert at the end would be 33 U period S period C period section 1251 et sec.
Yeah.
That-
I've seen that enough times.
Okay,
I'm good with that.
thank you.
Appreciate that. Awesome.
Any other comment or discussion about the definition section?
Good.
I think this was the wordsmithing part I went through before, the mobile, the two things that got added back in. So I want to look at those. Where are they in the end?
Mobile vendor and mobile vending courtyard, mobile vending vehicle and mobile vending courtyard.
16, 17.
17.
16.
16 and 17. Last on 16, first on 17. Which will flip-flop for alphabetical purposes.
And change font and size.
I mean, at prior meetings, and I don't feel like we completely put this to bed. I wasn't comfortable with the idea of the fact that we were lumping all types of activities that occur out of mobile vending vehicles as all sort of one category. That we sort of abandoned the idea of there being something that looks specifically at food trucks versus things that looked at, what else you're doing with
So-
things that are sort of temporary or on the move.
What is the actual purpose for separating, is the question.
Well, it's the same reason why we actually look at restaurants distinct from, like, we have a whole bunch of other aspects in here where we look at things that deal with food and we deal with those different, right? So, selling bath mats is actually different than running a restaurant. And that's sort of pretty common throughout the way we look at the rest of where things are going to be. So it seemed to be just at a minimum for consistency's sake to say, just because you put wheels on it, why would we become agnostic to the activity when we're rather focused on it as we've set up our zoning when it relates to a brick and mortar thing? So it seems odd. And it would sort of eliminate our ability to have those distinctions about where you would want those activities to occur.
Well,
Unless, I guess unless there's a broader sort of feeling about,
I would think,
restaurants in general and whatnot.
I would think we would want, mobile vending, is how we're defining it here, whether it's food or, T-shirts or blow-up things or jingly things for people to buy on the beach, whatever it is. Things you could buy out of a cart or a truck or something. I think we would only want them kind of located in the same type of area. I don't think we're gonna want those all over the place. We'll want them limited. So when it comes to where the zoning says those are allowed, I think it would be consistent, right? If we allow them in commercial or in resort commercial or, whatever. I just think they would be treated likewise because of the fact that they are supposed to be very short-term things. They're mobile, there's a courtyard, but it's not for the permanent placement of, right, per what it says in here. Located for the purpose of selling on a retail walk-up customers and not for the purpose of storage or sale of the mobile vending vehicles. So they can be there to sell stuff, but you can't store the vehicles there. It's temporary by its very nature. So to me, and this is just me, but to me, splitting them is not necessary because of that. I see what you're getting at, the
Could
difference
you say
between
like-
restaurant and store.
Well,
Because
we
you
have
have
a
a
whole bunch of other
restaurant,
stuff, like we have museums, we have nightclubs, we go into a lot of details about.
but none of those are
different-
temporary,
Different uses.
but they're not temporary. These are specifically for temporary things.
Well, I'm not sure that I saw them as temporary, I was hoping that some of them would operate year-round. I don't know if that's possible and if our market can support that, but
I think
That would be
operation
cool.
and the essential thing of being a vehicle, being self-propelled, pushed, pulled, all those kind of things, identify them as being a temporary structure kind of thing, right? So it's not a garage, restaurant, those things that are stationary in a place. They are meant to be moved due to the fact they have wheels or they're carts or those type of things, which makes it temporary. Now, you can have them come every weekend, Thursday through Sunday, and set up at the same place, but they have to go home or they have to go somewhere else. There's boundaries of how you do things.
That's my thought, is that they're inherently not permanent, right? Even if the
Meaning
same
wheels.
folks come back time and time and time
Yeah.
again.
I see, the need for them to be mobile and, that's just the nature of their business. But at some point, I think we talked about if we are able, and it's, there's enough activity that it could be year-round. And it's not as though they have to move each weekend, right? Is that what you're recommending?
No, I'm not recommending anything. I'm just
Okay.
saying the simple fact that they are able to be moved makes them temporary,
Yes,
right?
but they don't
So-
have to move.
Depending on how you determine how the courtyard's set up, or assuming that it would be a cup, and they would be required to be there on certain business hours, just like any other business would be. You can only set up from 8 to 11, or you can only set up from 30. It depends on the situational of the cup or whatever else, right? It would be basically the planning commission making the decision on that and then transferring that to the town council. But the distinct thing that it being on wheels essentially makes it temporary, because then they can go off and do catering in other places, not requiring them to stay there all year round. You see what I'm saying?
So I'm still focused on I get the courtyard part, right? Because that's a use, right? So we're actually identifying a use for zoning perspective and supposed to figure out what's compatible with what's there now and what could kind of be in conflict with what's there now. This is the one, we're creating a catch-all category where we don't normally do that. That's my concern, right? I mean, we even have like, if you're gonna sell vegetables instead of selling it at the grocery store, if you're gonna set it up on a table by the street, like we have a special category for farmers market, that's what it's called, right? But like, if you're gonna sell vegetables on the street side, which is a temporary thing, like we carved out a category for that. So, but that doesn't have wheels on it, right? It's just, that's a temporary
Wayside
use.
stands, so let's look at
So-
what wayside stand says. Wayside stand and or farmer's market, page 26. Because when you look at farmer's market, it points you to that
Right,
definition.
yeah.
Um,
And it's specific to a use. I'm saying that's, if we talk about like, well, what is it and what is it doing? So I'm just sort of looking for parity in the way that
So-
we handle the other things, to handle these mobile uses the same way we do fixed
So-
uses, or in that case, it's,
So this
Not
one
mobile,
also kind of
but-
falls into the same area, if you will, of not necessarily being food, because it also says, also may be taken on consignment for retail sale by a vendor,
Mhm.
which doesn't specify what they would be selling, that could be non-food products. So the wayside stand, wayside and or farmer's market is basically like a non-mobile version of the mobile vending vehicle. It can be food or it cannot be food. It's, right?
If I may, Ms. Knapples, you put your finger on the issue for this body, which is you regulate uses. So really, your focus, your primary focus is on mobile vending courtyard. The definition of mobile vending vehicle is only there because it is a necessary part of the definition of mobile vending courtyard. Again, your jurisdiction being the regulation or the recommendation for uses. That being true, and I'm simply just asking, truthfully, I'm just asking, is there a mobile vending courtyard, again, that being your primary focus, that you would allow food but not allow other things, or vice versa, allow other things but not food? If not, then it doesn't matter. If yes, then it would matter.
Well, it does matter. I mean, if I understood what you said correctly, I mean, if you have a mobile vending courtyard that does sell food, and you have one that does not sell food, those are two different things in my view. Because
Well, that's
if
the
it does
question.
not sell food, then it's not a restaurant. If it does sell food,
Yeah,
it's a restaurant.
but she's talking about the courtyard.
The
So
courtyard itself,
So
is
so
there-
if in the courtyard we allow both non-food and food vendors, but they have to be mobile, hence it's a mobile vending courtyard, then the definition of a mobile vending vehicle, I would think should be sufficient for the purposes of a mobile vending courtyard.
well,
Unless we are going to say you cannot sell food in the courtyard, or you can only sell food in the courtyard.
I think you should, if you do sell food in the courtyard, that there are additional requirements than if you don't sell food.
And I don't have an issue with that.
Okay.
What I'm saying
I
is-
think this is okay to be
What-
defined like this.
Yeah, because what I'm saying, and I think that's what she's saying as well, is if you have, so we're gonna break down into the different parts. Like you were saying, our primary concern is the courtyard itself. So the first question is, we're going to define a mobile vending courtyard. Is our intent to allow food and non-food items to be sold in that courtyard? In the, the definition of a mobile vending courtyard, do we think we should allow both food and non-food items in a courtyard, a mobile courtyard? Right? That's the first question. Food and non-food, or just food, or just non-food? I think it should be both.
And
I think that's the most efficient use of the space.
And Mr. Mack, if I may expand upon what you're saying, there are some vendors that themselves sell both.
Both, correct.
Like a taco truck may sell t-shirts, that say the
Hats.
taco truck.
Or koozies
Yeah.
or whatever.
Right, exactly. And so that's where we were going with that and including them. Because then, to your point, you could have then conditions that say, any vendor in your courtyard that sells food has to do
Must
this.
do blah, blah, blah.
Okay, right, but I mean, we're talking about primary uses though, because restaurants often have like, you know, I can get a T-shirt at Dockside, but it's not a retail clothing establishment, right? I mean, that's not, right? So the fact that they do multiple uses doesn't mean that the inherent use and impact of that use is really about clothing, right?
But I
They're
think-
really a restaurant.
But I think that is to be defined in the code, once we have defined the courtyard and have decided whether we're going to allow both things sold in the courtyard, right? Then if both those things are going to be allowed to be sold in the courtyard, we can define the mobile vending vehicle as one thing that can sell either, and then within the code, if you have a mobile vending vehicle in a mobile vending courtyard that sells food, you are required to do this list of things, right? So the code covers what's required of the food vendor from in a mobile vending thing. But as far as the mobile vending vehicle, we don't need, if we put them both together, the code can define the restrictions on the food side of it, is what I'm saying.
The code or the conditional use permit itself,
Correct.
the conditions, just the simple
Correct.
conditions.
Versus the definition specifying the use of the vehicle.
But if you're gonna say that the definitions would specify that then you'd have to specify what those things, you'd still end up with definitions, right? We still have to say if you're gonna use it if you're gonna specify in the code what the use is, you're gonna have to explain like what those uses are. Because what I'm worried about is that somebody will come in and say, I wanna have my yard be allowed to have a bunch of non-permanent things that come and go, right? And I think to try to figure out, like, we're supposed to look at like the impact on that area of the town, right, in terms of as a use. And you go like, well, it's substantially different to say, I want to have things that come and go, right? Which is sort of like, it's, to me, I guess it's kind of analogous to a campground owner, right? Who says like, I just have hookups and RVs come and go, but I don't really care what they do, right? Because they're all just people camping, right? But in this case, there's a potential to impact difference from, essentially ends up being a food court that doesn't have to, that has a competitive advantage against the brick and mortar places because they play by different rules. And it's all food, right? It's like 6 or 8 food trucks right next to people who have a competitive disadvantage because they have a brick and mortar place that's pre-existing, and that's actually going to potentially harm them. But I can't talk about those uses unless I know what kind of a mobile, like, what is the use of the vehicle, right? We haven't actually defined, like, is it like mobile retail versus mobile restaurant, to where the mobile thing just parallels, not to create new categories, but they just reference the things that are already in here about what kind of a business operation is it. And it's one of these things, but it also happens to move, as opposed to saying
Well,
the inherent, because the business practice isn't moving. The business practice is actually commerce, right? And we look at what the type of commerce is to figure out whether that's a compatible use next to a residence, next to a different type of business. So to treat it that the inherent business use is being on the move.
But I think for the purpose of the definition of the thing, you're getting too deep into it.
Yeah.
Because I think we restrict the location of the courtyard, right? Of a possible mobile vending courtyard to a particular area, whether it's commercial or resort commercial or whatever. I would certainly not think residential. And that's what restricts use, not the definition of the thing itself. I honestly feel that mobile vending vehicle, not delineating what that vehicle sells for the purposes of a mobile vending courtyard, is as far into that definition as we need to go. And then when somebody applies to use that area, that's where we get specific in the use of or the approval of that thing.
But why would
Yeah,
they
and
just be
it-
able to say that my use is the mobile unit, that my use is the definition you just provided me?
Well, again, if,
And
I
it's
think
not your
your
business sort of
concern,
what I do, because my use is the thing that fits your definition, so.
I heard you say that you were concerned that maybe, that this could be set up in someone's front yard or something, that would be a concern, but clearly, I think there are provisions in place, they would have to apply for, if someone wanted to do that, they would have to apply for a permit or a conditional use permit, and so we have ways of preventing that scenario from happening, if that was a concern.
So what are you affirmatively recommending to remedy this? I guess is a different way to come at this.
That we not do, if we're, is there an interest in setting up, from a land use point of view, are we interested in having areas of town, parcels, right? That our preferred use is going to be not to have buildings, right? But to have things that are non-buildings, that have commerce, right?
Yes.
Right, they're on the move, right? Is that our interest in zoning, is that that's really what we're looking to do? Or is it that we're looking to have, just the same way we look at, if it was a building, what is the use? So that's where I sort of get fuzzy about this, to go like, we've sort of like, I don't know why we're agnostic to what happens there when we really are far from agnostic, often to the level of like really get picky, about what fits in each category. Like what we went through we just went through this thing about having to green light the massage thing, because we're really into the detailed weeds on uses. But if she said, I want to do this out of a truck, we would have been like, you got a truck. So,
No,
and it wouldn't even be flagged as long as it fits as being a mobile vending.
Well, except for the fact that she's not selling food, personal property, or
Yeah,
retail.
then it turns into a services,
Yeah.
again.
So
Okay.
historically, there has been an appetite for that, i.e. the vendor program along the boardwalk and down at the point. So I think conceptually and historically, the precedent for this inclusive definition fits very well with the beach vibe and the vendor atmosphere of all of the Bike Fest and the River Fest and all of those
So
kinds of things.
this isn't the question whether we should have them or not, about like, why are we, just because it moves, not looking at the use of the thing versus.
Because I believe the restriction of the use of the thing will come out in the business license and the specificity of the permitting, not the definition of the vehicle itself. Right? Because if you define a mobile vending food unit as a mobile vending unit that sells food, period, now they can't sell hats, shirts, koozies, flowers, keychains. They can only sell food.
But I'm saying, you could say that thing about why do we talk about restaurants in the regular part of the brick and mortar code, right? Why
Because
are
they're
we-
permanent.
Right?
Because they're permanent. Inherently because they're permanent.
Oh, so I guess the premise
Because
is that
these-
there's not going to be an impact because they are not going to
No,
be there.
I'm not saying it's not going to be an impact. I'm just saying you're dealing with a different animal, right? It's,
By keeping it open, specifically for a courtyard, if I want food trucks to be there for festival, right? But I want clothing to be there for art gallery items on the art walk, and I don't want food there. By including all of the vendors into one piece, you don't have to delineate which one you're gonna do each week or each month, or what the ordinance might say. You're combining that food vendor,
courtyard.
mobile vending vehicle
Right.
to be inclusive of everything. So I don't have to get a special permit every time I want to do something different on every other weekend. I mean, that's my thought process on that, is keeping it open, and then on an individual cup, you delineate how long they can be open, all the restrictions that you want to put on it, whether or not they come up and say, I'm going to be strictly a vendor for ice cream, or strictly a vendor for food, or strictly a vendor for selling t-shirts.
Well, and so if we look at the rest of the mobile vending process throughout town, right? Anybody who sells food has to get, all of these have to get business licenses within town. And if they are a food vendor, they are restricted by whatever food, I haven't had it. So there are restrictions in accordance with that. If they are just a merchandise vendor, there are different requirements in the business license, and it's specified within the business license. So there's town code that already deals with mobile vendors, right?
You're talking about the business operation. We're talking about
So are you.
a place-based concept, right? So
Right, but you're
And-
talking
and
about
you're
the
talking-
business operation too, because you're specifically saying restaurant, right? So it's already covered in the mobile vending permit, right, for food vendors, hot dog stations, ice cream, whatever, right? So that's already covered. If we say mobile vending vehicle, we're just delineating that there are things going to be sold out of a thing that can move within the confines of a potential mobile vending courtyard. And then the business license for that vehicle or that business, whether it's food or otherwise, goes through the town. There's already code that covers that. That delineates all the rest of it. Because you can get a permit to pull up a food truck in front of the brewery, which is right down the street from, and it's the same concept. It's the exact same concept. The only difference is, instead of one for the evening, you might have whatever will fit in there, 6 or something like that, in one specified spot for the weekend or for a week.
but it is inherently different because you're talking about what the town government allows, and we don't actually make spatial decisions based on what the town government is allowed to do. We're making spatial decisions
On uses.
based on uses of owned property, right? You know, in terms of like,
Which is the courtyard, right?
so
The
just
whole,
saying.
the whole intent of this is the court, she's already said, our primary thought in this is the mobile vending courtyard.
Okay,
That's our primary.
so,
Mobile vending vehicle is kind of a subset of mobile vending courtyard. That's the purpose of this definition, is just to support that last couple of words under mobile vending courtyard. That's the only reason why we're even putting it in the definitions. That's it, it's the only reason. If it wasn't for that, there's no reason to even be bothering with it because it's already dealt with somewhere else.
And so that conceptually is to encourage the active commerce versus storage or sale of the vehicles.
Correct.
In that context.
Which to me means they need to be inherently mobile,
so,
not up on blocks. I just think it's unnecessary to separate it.
I'm a landowner, and if I have a courtyard, it basically means I get a post in the ground, I can sell somebody to park in a pad, plug in, right? That's the only thing with the mobile use. So the uses that happen on that, how do we have some control over the uses
Business
that happen?
license,
Business-
zoning.
Yes, zone, which is us, right? So that's where I'm talking about, how that.
So there's
that-
two
that fits in here.
mechanisms.
So would you
Right, so
refer to the restaurant, like if you were a food truck, like what would normal people would call a food truck, would you refer to the provisions that relate to restaurants as it in the zoning?
So, mobile vending vehicle or mobile vending courtyard can either be put in a conditional or by right use category. And if we put it in the conditional use category, then obviously we'd be able to review and place additional conditions upon that application as required. Versus by right, which is what you're talking about, and then that's just carte blanche. If you're in this district, this is something you can do, and there's no other oversight. But if we put in a conditional use, for example, in a C or the RC or wherever, then we have this CUP process where we can add additional stipulations, like you have to have a mix of different commerce types, or that you can have more one or the other, or we don't care what it is, or it must include seating and public restroom services if it has food, or whatever the other stipulations that we want to have on that. The the appropriate forum in this zoning context is that conditional use permit. It's not necessarily in this kind of definition.
And I think where the conditional use permit comes into play and where we set the conditional, where we set the conditional use is for the courtyard, right? The mobile vending courtyard could be a conditional use, right? And within a mobile vending courtyard, it shows in there that they can have mobile vending vehicles. Well, in order for them to do that, if they're going to sell food, they need to, per the conditional use, they need to have these things. See, the things that he was already delineating. So I think all those things you're concerned about get covered in that.
Mhm.
And it's the courtyard that gets zoned. And really the only purpose for the vehicle definition in there is because it's mentioned in the courtyard. It's it. So I think we can cover all the things you're concerned with by making the courtyard a conditional use only, no matter where we decide it's appropriate for it to land, whether it's in commercial or reserve commercial, which I think personally would probably be the only two applicable spots where something like that should be. Certainly not residential.
C1, CR,
RC, so C1, CR, RC is the intent, for only those three places. And if we make it, is there any room in CR? Is the other side of the street
No, that's
CR,
RC.
or is it?
This is, this is.
This
CR.
And there is room here,
CR,
and there is room
Yeah.
here, yes,
across the street
Is RC,
yes.
and then C1.
C1 is like the shopping center.
Right.
It's all,
Yeah.
basically Colonial Corridor up to.
Right, yeah, so, but that's the intent, is for just those three zones are the only places where the intent would be to have a mobile vending courtyard. But we could set it so mobile vending courtyards are only conditional use rather than by right, like you were saying, so that we still have, and the town still has
Yes.
oversight as to what goes in those areas and how they are managed, what's required of them when they go in those places, regardless of whether it's food or not food. So therefore, they can still be restricted like a restaurant is restricted through that conditional use permitting process. But whether or not only so many are allowed, or the provisions that they have to have for restrooms, washing hands, seating, delineation for ABC purposes, all those kinds of things. So I think all those concerns, it sounds like you have, like competing with a local restaurant, if it's right next to a restaurant. And I think those can all be covered through the conditional permitting process, the conditional use permitting process. So that one restaurant doesn't get inundated by 8 others necessarily, thereby potentially running it out of business. I think that's your concern, is what it sounds like to me.
What is the distinction between, so I have land, and I'm gonna let somebody park on my land, right? We have a thing called a parking deck, I get that, that's a building where you do that. Where does a bunch of gravel and grass that you charge somebody to park on, what is that called in our definitions?
It's gonna be a food.
Is that off-street parking, or what is that?
Yeah, that's it's a parking lot, yeah.
Not that there's necessarily one that's specifically for parking deck.
Yeah, so it's when I get a parking deck, we don't seem to have that function. but without
Off-street
the-
parking area, space provided outside of the dedicated street right of way for parking.
Yeah, that's kind of what I
Well,
was
there's a
wondering.
lot of definitions that are missing here. I don't think our purpose is to ensure that
No, I was just
everything is here.
wondering, if the only thing we're trying to figure out is who's allowed to charge somebody to park there?
Well,
Is it
parking,
essentially just, the fact that we're parking these mobile things, like, is it really just a parking lot?
No.
No,
From a use point of view, you're charging somebody to park a vehicle that's gonna come and go, right?
No.
So in that sense, how is it different than
Because of that.
Because you can't store the vehicle, and that's in the definition, cannot be stored. So if it's not in use, then it's being stored.
It's the activity out of it. I mean, a vehicle that is parked is sitting. There is no activity around it. It is the retail activity that is attendant to the mobile vending vehicles that changes the use.
Thanks.
By the way, now that we got on that kind of a tangent, on page 20-18 on off-street parking areas, towards the end of that first line, it says right-of-way or parking by vehicles. We're missing a P. at the beginning of that. Page 20-18
Okay.
on their off-street parking, where it says dedicated street right-of-way for parking.
I also have another correction in spelling, under page 20-17, non-conforming structure. The second line reads ordinance with a double O there.
Ordinance. Ordinance. 20-17.
Non-conforming structure.
Non-conforming structure.
Yes.
We will run a spell check,
That's-
yes, and but thank you for that. And just so you know, those types of clerical errors can be fixed at any time. In
Yeah.
other words, it doesn't require new public hearings and all that kind of thing. So anytime you find one, it is much appreciated.
Yeah, it just happened, since we were bouncing, I saw that.
We appreciate that, much appreciated.
So,
I now better understand.
Did it feel a little more, does it make more sense? I don't know if we've talked it to where it does or doesn't, or.
well, I'm hoping.
I understand it in terms of our exercise tonight as it relates to the definition exercise, so in that sense, I get it.
Okay.
So we're gonna move along.
The other
with
stuff is-
definition exercise.
It's-
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
separate.
right.
That's the
That's
next
a
item on the
separate-
agenda, and apparently we flogged that horse significantly. Hopefully they'll expedite the other, since we've done a
Yes.
little bit of a deep dive there.
The only other one that I didn't have a note on, but I remembered it from before, were we supposed to do something about flutter flags in the definitions?
That's next.
That's
That's
sign
next.
ordinances.
Right, but I'm saying, now that we're doing,
This is not,
That's not the vending
No.
one.
it's not definitions, it's in the
Signage.
sign ordinance, which is number 7 on the agenda.
no, I'm talking about the definition for what that
Or what a
is.
flutter flag is.
Is, like, do we do that now so that we can then have
I think
a
that's
conversation
sign
about?
specific.
Because
It
it-
is sign specific, because we have sign vertical all kinds.
Because it seems like
somewhere in
it
there.
seems like it fits in, although when we get to the sign ordinance part, I understand we need to work on that, but if you're in the definition section, it looks like it's a banner. And we're talking about cloth, flexible, fabric of any kind, blah, 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 it looks like it's a banner, so,
That moves. It's
Right.
mobile.
so,
Sign banner,
yeah.
sign with letters, illustrations, or symbols applied to cloth, canvas, or flexible plastic or fabric of any kind for the purpose of conveying commercial or non-commercial information.
So
It
it's
looks
like
like
cover
it.
flutter flags to
Looks-
me.
I don't see why it would be excluded.
So that was sort of, I was trying to figure out why we're talking about flutter flags when it sounds like it's a banner in the definition. Or if it's not, and we need another
We could,
carve out, then we should talk about that.
I mean, we could put to include flutter flags in it if we really have to. But it sounds to me like it already, like this kind of covers it.
Agreed.
So the term,
Sign, comma, banner.
Banner.
well, so when we get to that, you have that for the first read tonight, as we've talked about. The prohibition is signs that flutter, rotate, so they're not called flutter flags. It describes their movement. So it is called signs that flutter, rotate, or otherwise move for the purpose of attracting attention.
And that is in the sign ordinance section.
Correct. So it doesn't say specifically flutter flags, because otherwise, yes, I would agree with that, we would need to be defined, but it doesn't.
No,
It
it's
doesn't
that
use it
refers to any type of signs. Thank you, that helps.
Yeah, that does, thank you, because I was looking for flutter or anything anyway.
That's not like-
12-8, paragraph A, and
But
you'll
before we
see
get
that.
there, since we're working on, trying to draw this public hearing discussion to a close, do you have any more, items for discussion or points of, correction?
Not by me.
So we worked along the way and got general consensus. So can we get amendments to, or
Can I make a motion to adopt for recommendation to town council, the Article 20 definitions as amended this evening,
Second,
based on this document with text changes.
With second, okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Christensen,
aye.
Mr. Mack,
Aye.
Mr. Knuckles.
Aye.
Ms. Leonard.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Yes, we'll take a 5-minute recess.
Well, I just do it.
This is necessary.
Yeah. I feel like-
Necessary.
That's why we got people lined up the door to sign up to do this.
I don't know.
I'm still tripping.
Provisions. Okay. Oh, I see. So, oh, we're in recess, so I should have that later. It's hard for me sometimes. Sorry, Mike.
These wacky lunches all off the record. So
Okay.
let's go.
And maybe watching something.
So-
And I appreciate that you get that the back and forth is never personal. It's just, you're trying to get your point across, I'm trying to get my point across. Eventually, after we beat each other up, we find some level ground where we agree on.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to understand
Process.
like what the other person's perspective is, because
Absolutely.
ultimately this has to be digestible to all kinds of people. So
Yeah.
no, I think this is a really,
Yeah.
no, I think this is healthy.
There are people who take offense, not us, clearly. But,
Yeah, and according to what she says, as painful as it is to do this, I really do appreciate the time and the expertise that you took, especially in the environmental area, where you know a lot more than I do. So I do appreciate it. I don't necessarily like it, but I appreciate it.
My wife kept telling me, like, can you? I was like, no, not yet. I was like, just let me get through this.
Okey dokey.
So this was the work that we had to do, right? This is our only,
The
Voting
two
things.
public hearing, yes, that was it. So now we can, I appreciate the illustration of discussion / first read of and discussion of, so that we don't necessarily have to tackle all of this in its entirety this evening.
Thank goodness.
are we officially back?
Because I have like a time.
So we're adjourning the recess and resuming the meeting. Moving on to discussion of mobile vending.
No, 7.
Okay, this is number 6, discussion of the vending, the vehicle and mobile vending courtyard by zoning district. Okay, so
With the discretion of the chair, if I could just have one comment now, because I wanted to get that voted and passed. As I've been hoping that we can make, our process to the public more transparent. Part of what we've been doing is just going like, oh, there's a comma in the wrong place. And some of the things we've been working on through this exercise is because we actually have policy intentions. And because we were just saying like, hey, we're working on definitions, it makes it very hard for folks to understand, like, you know, there was only a few things, workforce housing, things about food trucks, or if there's some way to say, like, you know, buried in the weeds of like all the other nonsense, like there's a few things that like are really potentially going to affect the town buried in these weird headlines we have on agendas. So I don't know exactly what the right process for that is, but it is, or there's a reason I think why the room is empty when you just say, oh, all we're working on is definitions, because it just sounds like a homework assignment to clean up your,
you're
you
asking
know.
for some what's in it for me for the.
Yes, right, to say, to actually call that out and to say that we're working on definitions and specifically, we're talking about adding the following things or deleting the following things, but, to just sort of highlight some of that somehow. Because I think some of the stuff we've done is really going to impact people, and other stuff is kind of like, it just makes the town run better, right? And to draw that distinction as to what we're up to before the meeting, so that people don't have to sort of come and sit here on the hopes that they find it. In part because it'd be too late, right? Because we've already had the
Generally
public
speaking-
conversation window. They can't sort of come in the middle of the conversation and go, ha, now that I know what you're really up to, like, I'd really like to talk to you about that. It's too late for them.
It garners the most interest for, obviously, conditional use permits and things that are actively going through the commission to the council, right, en route. And so you'll, as is evidenced this evening and the last several that we've had, attendance is primarily based on the hearings and what's going to be passed, and not necessarily so much of the yeoman's work that we've been performing here lately, where we roll up our sleeves and go line by line, and understanding that this is largely a volunteer and unheralded effort. I agree. I would love to be able to say, okay, this is important because, however, I'm not sure that what's the most effective way to communicate that. But I definitely agree with the sentiment. I would like to be able to say, hey, this is important to the town because, or, we need to have more participation in hearing from the public because this all affects you in some way or another. However,
In some jurisdictions, they actually, make it blatant instead of, they say, we will be voting, we anticipate voting on the following items tonight, right?
Mhm.
Right, even though we, through Inside Baseball, know that the word public hearing means that, right? But that's not really obvious, right? Public hearing, we know, means that you could come speak about something, right? But the fact that we intend on moving forward, maybe even just at that simple level to sort of indicate, can't promise that we're gonna vote on something, but we intend on doing a process that we hope will end up with a vote.
so for here, it specifically says public input A and then B action. So you recommended changing action to something that more explicitly states potential vote on resolution.
Yeah, and others, like I said, in some other jurisdictions, and they actually just use plain language and they say, our intention is to vote on the following, vote on the following topics, as a part of tonight's business. And then they have this, which is sort of a process diagram, So sometimes simple language is, powerful, yeah.
Okay. Duly.
Mr. Howe,
Yes.
can we revisit item number 6? There was discussion about where they are as far as zoning district. We talked about it.
Yep.
But there was no specific
And-
language says.
I'm bringing the plane back around. Yes,
Okay.
sir. That's exactly, we haven't specifically addressed this. And so I was going to ask for, since it's just discussion, what is it, are we wanting to make recommendations for future text amendments for this specific?
Yes, staff is seeking guidance as to which districts, because this will require text amendment to the specific districts, now that we have this in the definitions. So we could bring that to you pretty quickly with your guidance as to which districts that you would like for these to appear in. And I have at the moment RC, CR, and C1.
By conditional use.
By conditional use, yes, I have that. So if there are any others, with your direction and your guidance, then we will move to amend those articles accordingly. And then in the process, make other amendments that are to clean those articles up.
Okay.
So it's not likely that we'll have any mobile vending vehicles out on the point, for example, anymore.
Not necessarily because of the
This is
fact that it's owned by municipal property. The
Okay,
town owns Castlewood. Although it's R2, it is applicable to be able to have a food truck or food vendor in that area.
You know, I heard, and you know, that there was an issue with the proximity of the mobile vehicle to the wellhead.
That is correct.
And so can that issue be addressed to allow?
Yes,
Okay,
it just has to be an excess of 50 feet away from the road.
right.
Which there are plenty of areas that are outside the 50 feet, still owned by the town that could be permitted to allow food trucks or food vendors to be there.
But we're talking about food, but we're talking about mobile vending courtyards, right?
On private property, that's right,
That
that's the
is
distinction,
Correct.
yes.
Right, so,
Well, it says vending vehicles and courtyard, or slash courtyard.
But the town is not subject to the zoning ordinance. And so town-owned property, if they want to have vendors
Right.
on, like a ice cream truck in the street, for example.
Yes.
That's town property, that's fine.
but what we were talking about tonight was specifically the zoning for the courtyard slash.
Correct.
On private property.
Not owned by the town.
No.
Meaning,
So property not owned by the town, whether it's one of those, any of those three districts, not property owned by the town.
correct.
Okay.
They have their
Gotcha.
own, they have their own
Yeah.
ordinance for town-owned property
Gotcha.
with that.
Okay,
Well, Despite the fact that I live in a CR district, it seems to me that since there are restaurants in the CR district, that we probably should also consider having courtyard, vending, mobile courtyards, what's the
Vending
exact term?
courtyards.
And mobile vending courtyards in RC as well.
And they can do
Yeah.
that. They can apply for a conditional use permit and do that as long as they're not.
Would that be conducive? I mean, to be honest with you, my property borders on a brick and mortar, well, there's no brick, but you know what I mean? Establishment that has in the past served as a retail location. And I'm not sure I'd be crazy about having a mobile court there, but I think it would be unfair to exclude that activity when we allow other similar activities.
So, and in reference to that, Bob, I think the three areas we were talking about was C1, CR, and RC, right?
No.
Yeah.
But that doesn't include the point which is R1, right?
Correct.
That's
So,
R2,
It's our-
R2,
but it's
That's
owned
right.
by the town.
but that's,
Right.
so that's totally
So-
separate.
yes, on both town.
So for non-town owned property,
Uh-huh.
C1, CR, and RC is what we were talking about.
Correct.
Okay, I'm C1, RC,
And CR.
CR.
So essentially this,
Yeah,
this
this
is
area.
locked down here and all the way up to Colonial.
And up Colonial.
So Simon, in prior discussion, I think we sort of said we backed into a way that we think that we've been allowing something that we want allowed, which was food trucks that were associated with existing restaurants or some sort of existing activity, right? Didn't have to be their food truck, right? But there was like food happening there, right? Or something like that. So there's things like outside the brewery where they would do something on the street. Now the street's town property, right? But to say like in theory, or like what Denson's was doing when they were still operating as a physical restaurant, when they would have the food truck next door, they said like that probably makes sense, although we didn't actually, that's not really in the rules. Like, so one step I think we can do is we could sort of try to formalize that and say, or have the discussion about, is that something that we would like to have as a common usage when you say restaurant, and where restaurants are allowed in these zones, that you can have food trucks there, right? Or, same thing, whether it's, any sort of entertainment venues often have food trucks that come in as a part of, they have bigger events, right? So this is not necessarily something that's a new use, right? We could just clarify to say, for the existing uses that we have now, can you have food trucks kind of associated with your use, right? And then the next step, which is sort of what it seems like we were, I think, kind of hopping over that and going to next, which is there would be a usage, which is to have additional food trucks or or retail or any of those sorts of things, mobile sorts of things, temporary things, in terms of it temporary, in terms of not getting it's a non-permanent structure. That we want to have those in these categories. As you know, as a category in terms of, and then I'm hoping that we can get to that point, if we can get the first thing put to bed, because I think we have to take care of the things that we already have happening that we kind of think is okay, right? And decide affirmatively that's okay, and if we decide that the concept is okay, which zones is that going to be allowed in? And then we can sort of, move on to the part about going, an additional use beyond that. Because I
Could you
think that
give
to
an
some degree
example
starts to change the depiction of town. 'Cause if you initially go with the whole, okay, everybody who's already a restaurant or a bar or something like that, them having food trucks, then you start to sort of get the depiction of going like, well, how many mobile structures are we talking about adding? Plus the town program that it has. So I know at one point there was a lot of pressure to go like, we really need this because there's only like, the town only has like 5 slots and it was a mess because they didn't move in the right time, right? We're kind of past that now.
So I think-
In terms of that limitation, and because we started to do things like go like, oh, well, they can just park on the street in front of existing businesses. And if that's cool, that, in terms of as a use, that we're going to say that works in these zones.
Are food trucks covered under the town code in any way, shape or form already?
They are not. So a food truck that is associated with a brick and mortar restaurant, that was deemed by the zoning administrator to be an accessory use. And in part it was used during COVID. But it was deemed to be, because it was the same restaurant, it was deemed to be an accessory use. Food trucks that are not affiliated with a brick and mortar, they are covered by the town code in the town vendor program, so that only applies to town-owned property. With respect to them being located on private property, they were not covered at all. And so that was the need that brought about the need to address this in its
So-
entirety, because they were not allowed at all
Okay,
anywhere.
so to use specific examples, just for my own clarification purposes. So the Denson's food truck or food trailer that was on the Denson's property because it was already part and parcel of the Denson's organization was perfectly allowable because same said item, right?
Right, and it was deemed to be, and that's an interpretation question, but it was deemed to be an accessory part of the restaurant business.
Okay, but Denson's food trailer in front of the brewery is a vendor licensed issue.
It's a peddler, they have a peddler,
Right.
because it's on the street, so they could get a peddler.
But it's
Special use.
right, special use
On public property.
on
Correct.
public property. So now what we're trying, so we kind of have that. So any food or mobile vending thing that was parked on a street was covered under the public property and had to have the special use vendor license. So I think that's where we get at currently, where we are for food trucks, if you will,
Yeah, and then there's the next step about having
on private
things
things.
like, I believe and I'm just using this as examples, not to say that it's definitively this happened, but if I remember correctly, we've had things like over the Ice House Brewery, right? So like in larger events, they've had food trucks that they don't own that would come in and be like, for a special larger event. They bring in and essentially, it's on private land, but it's really dealt with as essentially as a continuity of their existing restaurant operation.
Realistically, if it was on the driveway, that's actually a road, they don't own that. That what looks like a driveway leading up to the ice house is a road. Technically,
Okay,
so I'm pretty sure that's public
I think
land.
what you're getting to
Potentially,
now is.
but I'm now
yeah.
talking about like, yes, so we're talking about parcels just for the sake of food trucks. Like, is there an initial step about saying, do we think that it's suitable from a zoning point of view, like where we want this to happen, to have, you don't own the food truck, somebody else owns it, it's an out-of-town business. And I think there's some reasons for us thinking about licensing and stuff and about where the money is going when sales happen. on land with existing uses that are compatible with that, essentially. Like if it's a restaurant, it's a capacity add-on to the restaurant,
So
right?
that would be that interpretation of auxiliary use, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be part of the same business, or is it a complementary, like you said, if it's still a food truck on a brewery that serves food.
Well, with the Denson example, it was actually part of the same,
Well, that's what I'm saying.
same business. So there's a
I'm
question
asking
about
about that
what you would-
interpretation stretch.
What you articulate that as is, so if you have, let's say Napa, just so everybody knows the place. Napa owns that piece of property, they would then come in and get a cup or a food court to be at their place.
And that's one.
And that's how you, and then one or more food vendors on their piece of property. Just like if we had an application for one across the street, they would come into a cup. For any of the district areas that we have identified. So each individual privately owned landowner in those districts would be required to come in and get a cup to have a food court in their yard.
Or a mobile
So-
vending courtyard in their,
And,
on their property for that period.
and so I think that just for point of order, one or more needs to be included in the language.
It is.
Okay.
So that would be the case, whether it's for as an ongoing, like, the inherent nature of my business is I rent out space for vendors, right?
Right, if I owned a piece of property in town on these things, and I wanted to make a vendor courtyard,
Vending courtyard.
vending courtyard,
Mhm.
as the owner, I would come in and request a cup to have those in my establishment, and then I would essentially charge the vendor $100 fee a year, whatever my thing is. But I, as the property owner, would need to request a cup for that particular courtyard.
But you're starting to talk now about an ordinance, right? That would,
Correct.
yeah, okay. And probably we would all agree that we need a cup. But to me, if they are serving food on that particular parcel, then they would have to supply certain things that they would not necessarily have to supply. And given to me, I would recommend that the ordinance would include that they would have, probably tables to eat at, kind of like the ice cream place does, and that they should have a restroom where people can wash.
And so we can.
Typically, food trucks are not required to have a restroom.
Right.
They're accessory to whatever area they're at. So go back to the Napa scenario. If a food truck is sitting at Napa should not have to be required to provide a bathroom for the food truck.
Why do you say that?
Because it's not part of the health department and all that stuff for food vendors. So the food vendor has to have a health department certification from them.
You're talking about state,
Correct.
Curtin State.
Virginia Health Department has to provide them with a okay to operate. As a town, we would require them to have a business license, proof of insurance, just like we do for our current vendor program. And then my recommendation would be permission from the landowner. The town would need to receive permission from the landowner that you're gonna be setting up at that particular courtyard. So then we have record of location, one for like 911, those type of things. But other than that, we shouldn't require them to have a bathroom because they're not a brick and mortar. Virginia State Code requires that for brick and mortars specifically, but not necessarily for food vendors.
So there's already requirements in place for what mobile vendors have to have per state code?
Yes.
Okay, so as long as they adhere to those and they, like you said, are registered with that
Correct.
location, their license then falls under that location.
Right, and then the Virginia Department of Health will go out and check those, and if they're not compliant or if they fail,
They
they can
close
be shut down.
Right.
At which in time that, the town could then revoke their business license or revoke the cup or any other areas that they want to, see fit.
But the town should recognize that, restaurants are required to have restrooms. And so if the town is going to allow this kind of activity, in any kind of extended way, that the town is gonna have to provide those restrooms, or at least make sure that they're around.
I think hence the mobile part of it.
We have public restrooms.
We do, but I've been saying if you had public land that was near a public, if you had private land that was near a public restroom, that would be more amenable to being approved by the town rather than one that is far, far away from a public restroom.
So you can make the recommendation of having a bathroom.
Yep.
And that's
part of the conditional use permit process.
Yeah, well, that's,
Yeah.
basically,
pay
we're
that.
talking about,
Okay.
an ordinance, and I'm just saying that should be part of the conditional use, and we're also, seems like we're also saying no matter what they're gonna do there, we want it to be a conditional use. So,
So that's what she asked for.
So my question then would
Where's
be,
it at?
if you have,
Should it be conditional?
if you're developing a courtyard, are you gonna require the homeowner to build a bathroom on their land in order to have a courtyard? That would be the question then.
I just think it's a good question. And I would think that, in certain cases, we would certainly want to require that.
So to me, we're talking about where things go in town, what kind of things we want to happen in town and where they go. So this isn't allowed currently. Status quo is like, you can't do this, right? You can't do this on private land. Wanting to change that, to have this be allowed on private land, to me means that there's gotta be some rationale behind that, because there are some impacts that like are hard to control, like the things that you don't have to have the things that a brick and mortar sort of establishment does, right? About bathrooms and a lot of the other stuff. It's just the nature of these mobile businesses, they have a different sort of impact. So one is to say that there's not enough capacity. Well, we would want to say, I think from a public interest point of view, we want more of these things in town than we currently have, right? Because if we have the ones if we're already there, we're happy with them, right? In terms of capacity, we don't need to change anything. So we want to first say, we want more of them, and we want more of them because they can't fit within what the town's program has capacity for. I'd like to hear that from the town to say like they're at capacity, or there's no like latitude for continuing, that their program would suffice in providing this function.
I think we
Because they
have
have a lot of direct control over that, running their own program, so that's, whereas we
I
just.
think we have heard that from the town, in some of the questionnaires and things that we put out, One thing that people always say is they want more restaurants, more opportunities to eat. And I'm all in favor of adding food courts. How many food courts are we gonna put? Are we gonna say that they have to be so far away from another food court? Are we gonna say, that they need a restroom? Those are the kind of things to me that should be in the ordinance that sets this up.
So to me, between the program that we actually have as like what's on Town Hill, right? Those are sort of fixed locations, and then we have the vendor program, which is sort of what's allowed on the streets to be used temporarily on streets. Between those two programs, if we could, I would love to have an understanding from staff about, can you show me either, is it a constraint that relates to space available, that having these on private land, would be good because they're at max? Or is it a timing question, right? Is it that the town can't provide this at certain times of year and they need sort of surge capacity? But I'm trying to figure out, other than the interest of wanting to make money by leasing land for this activity, what are we trying
Well,
to solve? I know that as recently as like 6 months ago, we were trying to fix some problems because we went through a really weird hiccup between the Dodson development sort of moving some and Dominion Power, right? Those are sort of all things that are, my understanding, are behind us now. So I'm just hoping that we're not trying to make these changes.
Well,
to
the town
address
wouldn't
something.
be making money off of leasing the private land because it's privately owned land. So the town wouldn't make any money off of that.
No, but I'm saying like us allowing this use, then that's what we would do, is instead of saying that land would go to some other purpose, it would now go towards, right, is that what we're trying to accomplish? And I'm first trying to understand, like, do we have a bottleneck? I know we had a bottleneck a year or two ago right? Does that still exist?
I
In which
think one of the
case,
bottlenecks we have is parking. If we continue to allow mobile vendors parking on the streets, we're already running into parking issues. And as land that is currently used for parking gets developed and some of that parking is displaced, I think we don't really want to continue to have mobile vendors taking up parking spaces because typically one food trailer, let's go with a food truck or a food trailer, there's probably at least 2 parking spaces, most likely.
well, that's definitely the
Versus
case,
one.
but that's an interesting question, though,
So-
from the town's perspective of would they disband the vendor program?
I don't know that they would disband it, but I
If
think,
this, if, essentially what they tell vendors no. Because they would just say, go rent it from the private end.
well, the town would still have the vendor program because of festivals, if nothing else. When folks come in for festivals, vendors would get their license from the town to come in for the festival, et cetera, whatever, blah. And those are usually like on Town Hill or something. So they're off the street, they're still on public land, but they're not taking up parking spaces. Whereas the day-to-day operation of some of these things, we probably don't want on the streets, again, because they're taking up, pretty valuable parking spaces. People want to be able to park. So
But
I
they
think
would
that
still
kind of
be able
falls
to
to-
park there even if we pass this.
they
Unless we
could,
specify.
but, the town would probably be, more willing to approve mobile vendors to be in courtyards off the streets
Yeah.
than they would out of those and on the streets. So this gives the town kind of the option to kind of funnel these things off the streets. Wherever in one of these 3 districts they may end up, it still gets them off the street, out of the paid parking areas and onto dry land, if you will.
I seem to recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that the town manager has a final say on permits to be on the street.
Correct.
So that's one way the town now can regulate and can regulate more if we had.
These
more-
courtyards.
Yeah,
Available.
Yeah.
So there's one capacity.
So
You're speaking
you're
of
saying, in terms of public interest, there's an interest in trying to get the existing food vendor program trucks
Off the
off
street,
the street.
for the sake of conserving parking spaces, which are becoming a premium.
So wasn't the lots that would then be these off private property lots, right? So right now you could just say like, there's nothing there, I'm just gonna turn it into a paid parking lot, right? And soak up some of the parking capacity problem. If we then flip that and say like, well, it's gonna be a food vendor or mobile vendor lot as opposed to a regular parking lot, how have we achieved better uses? Or is all this just a swap? We just wanna have the ability to have all these uses?
Well, it's privately owned property, so we don't really have a say about how that's gonna be used, whether it's for a vendor.
Right,
or-
I'm saying we're actually trying to carve out. a-
Well, I mean, it may not be a primary, but, it's not like the riverboat stacks them all the way up to the curb, or this fellow right here. May or may not be permitted, but routinely employee private property is parking.
Because to me, I think we need to start with these, like, what are we trying to achieve questions before we figure out which zones we put them in, and, because that sort of dictates the question about, like, if you sort of understood that, like in the RC zone, if you could say like, well, the town's already kind of got this covered through their program in RC, maybe you don't need them in RC, but if you was in another area of town, you said, well, there's no public property that really works, therefore you would need to have them in those zones, right? So
That's just right before you get to that one, just a quick point of curiosity. So at the end of Hawthorne, the lot at the end of Hawthorne, I know it's privately owned, but is that still RC? So there's a spot that's right by the beach that could potentially be a mobile vending courtyard that could probably fit several mobile vendors in it, that's right by the beach. But once the development happens, there's gonna be a restaurant right across the street from it. So that's still an RC area. Across the street is also RC. just directly across Washington, is also RC, where there's a couple, at least one empty lot that could potentially be one. You've got this big empty lot here that's CR, but you'd never know that by the fact that they're right across the street from each other. And then, of course, you got the C1 district, which goes all the way down Colonial, and any empty space along there. And there's several that could potentially be used for these kinds of things. So I think limiting it to those three spaces, which are really just right there, right here, and along Colonial, I don't know that we would want.
Your majority of your commercial anyway.
Right, correct. So I don't know that we would, I think as far as where we would want them, that's it. That's the only zones that we would want to have something like that. Now, if there's more development within, although Food Lion is commercial as well, correct?
Yeah.
So there could be something out of the Food Lion, right? I'm assuming the empty lot next to the Food Lion is also C1?
Correct.
So
Yes.
huge empty lot there, which could potentially be, mobile food, whatever. But they're not in people's backyards, right? They're not directly in neighborhoods, so we don't have to worry about that.
Well,
And
kind of. So, CR does go down here and then goes towards the elementary school.
Okay.
I'm sorry, town. How big
Yeah.
First,
right,
Towards, town hall.
yeah,
Right, so that is also part of CR that goes back through the neighborhood itself.
Yeah,
Just because of the fact that there was a school there.
correct. Okay.
Um,
But
and
all
then-
of that space is becoming quickly eaten with housing,
Yeah,
so
but
it's rather
I'm
irrelevant.
just trying to make sure that
No,
your verbiage is
Yeah, thank you.
not incorrect or,
Yeah.
that.
That we're correctly
Everybody knows
identifying what the zones are.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And also, C1 is along First Street up towards Olis as well.
yes.
Okay,
So
just that end of it?
from
Where's like the-
essentially
the
the
golf cart?
high school football field
Uh-huh,
towards Olis.
okay.
So like the photography studio.
Right,
Yeah.
that strip right there.
Both
is
sides or?
Both sides of the street, correct.
But otherwise, it doesn't go like
It's not gonna go
on
on the
Fourth
number
Street
streets.
No, it
or
doesn't.
on Locust
Correct. It's
or
the
on
main
Riverview
corridors of
Circle.
those
That's
areas.
R2.
Gotcha. So for the most part, it's out of the neighborhoods.
So I'm trying to think of this as a capacity question, right? So you have to start with the assumption that the existing program, to where we can already have these things, because we already see them around, right, is insufficient, we need to have more, right? And that, I think from a use perspective, then we have to figure that turning some of this very precious land in terms of what we were trying to have as a downtown area into an area that essentially its purpose is to, and allow, these vendors are largely not Colonial Beach vendors, right? And these are folks that have business licenses elsewhere, so these are what, like their profits and stuff that essentially while it provides a important service, particularly during events and stuff, compared to brick and mortar places that could be on that same parcel if we continue to develop the downtown area. It's money that leaves town, as opposed to the stuff that's here, inherently more of that revenue stays here because it's by nature not mobile, right?
To an extent, however, they are required to have a business license that is based on, I believe, total receipts or gross receipts. Gross receipts for, so if they're there and they're vending, whatever their gross sales are, a percentage of that is owed to the town.
Right, and the other part of that is it's what's considered a low impact development, so the changing it from, like you said, essentially an RV lot with a couple of hookups to
A building.
a building is very low threshold. You're not going to incur much of a loss. If a brick and mortar becomes the highest and best use for the real estate parlance, then that's not an inherent barrier to it. It's not like changing building type or zoning type or complete overhaul, wholesale change. It's okay, well, we're just gonna wipe it out. It's already pretty leveled and cleared out.
I'm just saying, it's a trade-off thing. So rather than hoping for more development of the type of development that's been happening now, old businesses that were abandoned, being gutted, turning into being rejuvenated, being repurposed, and some new construction that's been happening, right? Rather than that, we're interested in either having a total number of more mobile businesses than we currently have, right? If you assume we have a capacity problem, or taking the stuff that's currently being managed by the town and moving it onto those parcels. So I'm just trying to be sensitive to the fact that like, there's not a infinite amount of land that we're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And this is allowing a new use to just kind of like not, I mean, to think about like, do we want the sort of mobile hookup comings and goings thing? This is, for folks that remember what Eleanor Park was like, it's the whole like transient nature of things versus a stable business, right? So it's sort of the same thing, but it's on the commercial side, right? It's a set of transient businesses versus fixed businesses. And just to put some thought into, is this something that we're hoping to grow? And if it is, that's fine. I just like to have that be intentional to say like, we're really trying to make room so that we have more of this stuff than we had before.
I think it's more about providing opportunity for other businesses, because a lot of businesses that start off as a food truck will expand into a brick and mortar at some point in time.
That's assuming that there's a capacity problem. So you're saying that like, I can't come operate here as a food truck because there's no place to put me. Well, I'm talking about like, I own a parcel of land, right? And, the question is like, what do I do with it, right? Do I develop it into something? Do I use it as a parking lot for event parking, right? There's things I can do with it now. This isn't one of them, right?
But if
Is
it
by
was,
making this
it'd
one
be a
of
great
them.
stopgap until you find someplace who would want to buy it and put a brick and mortar. You could continue to make money off the property until a larger development type of thing were to make itself available. So there's an opportunity for the landowner in that. As far as, say someone did decide to use the land at the end of Hawthorne to put a vendor court there, it puts facilities right next to the beach where someone could maybe have a sandwich shop or an ice cream shop in a mobile unit, where people could step from the beach in a bathing suit and buy something and go right back to the beach and eat, versus not having that kind of a capability. I've heard people complaining that there's nothing like that available.
So I think I'm
provides a use.
paraphrasing, you're saying we want more of this, right?
To an
Well,
extent.
if I
That's
may,
okay, right? I'm just trying to think, and if we want more, then we need to have a program that allows more.
if I may, this use was brought to the town by Downtown Colonial Beach, the Economic Development Committee. Everything that we have heard from many, many citizens of residents of this town is that this is something that they want. I know there are a couple of leaders in the community who have done a great deal of research, who have visited these types of facilities in other localities. It is resounding, the support that and the request that staff has received from the community for this type of use. In addition to that, our economic development director, we went to her and said, asked her about that. Full support. Staff, we find no downside. All of the research that we've done, some of which we have shared, or a lot of which we've shared with you. So again, this is something that your community is asking for.
Can you hang some meat on the level of interest you're talking about? Because we know about the one parcel. Because as we're talking about this, are there, from the people that have expressed interest, are we talking about like 2 courtyards, 10 courtyards?
No, I'm not talking about people who are interested in doing this. I'm just talking about people who would like to see it because they feel like it would help to grow the town.
Yes, in
So
fact,
I'm not talking about people wanting to go into business. And before I forget,
So, can you recharacterize that? So who is the?
I'm not going to give you names. I'm not
No,
going to
I'm
speak
just
for
saying
other
an order
people.
of scale. When you say like, is it like?
I've probably heard from 10 different people at least.
absolutely.
And
The
people
Economic
speaking on behalf of
Development
groups as well.
Committee has worked very hard on this.
I'm sorry?
The Economic Development Committee actually
Exactly.
brought this initiative forward. I'm a member of that committee.
Exactly.
And, it was expressed through, I think, a lot of businesses that wanted to see, people coming into the downtown.
Right.
And so anything we can do that would attract that kind of activity is seen in a positive way.
Which I
Also
think is the
potentially-
reason that the town got in that business to begin with, to provide that,
Yes.
that for visitors. So I think that's the reason that it was, and I do think, before I forget to say this, these types of uses on private property versus the town program, it's a little bit of apples and oranges, because the town does it, I think, for the reasons that we were just talking about, and it's a great program, but some of the ideas that we've heard about uses on private property, and the reason I said apples and oranges is because they're talking about lighting and landscaping and, making it nicer, things that the town really can't do, because the property is used for other uses, so things that we wouldn't do, so it would be a different atmosphere. I mean, those are just ideas that are floating around at the moment, but I think those are the goals of the people.
And for
who want to do
downtown, I
this.
think it's gonna be very attractive, especially, I heard that the Dora was approved. And so I see that synergy working together and, enlightening downtown. It's very positive.
And it could provide a variance of businesses that we currently don't have, that could at least test the water before they want to build a brick and mortar.
I think everybody here knows that there's a huge turnover in the restaurant business. And one of the advantages of a food court is they can pull out as soon as they figure they're losing money and not be that much of a problem. Those that are making money and doing well will want to establish and find a home, a permanent home here. So that to me is a big plus for building, the area that we need most to build. I don't personally think we need more restaurants, but I know that the people, as pointed out, that they just want variety. Well, food trucks provide that variety, and if we don't like that variety, they won't make money, they'll be gone, and another food truck will pull in, hopefully. But I also like the idea that these courts are not just for food, but for other things. And that's what we really need, in my opinion, in the RC district, is the more the novelty shops, more of the things. I can't tell you how many people said, oh, I can go, my wife and I are going to the beach. I said, oh, you're coming here? Oh, no, we're going to Virginia Beach. They have all these little shops that my wife likes to go to, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So that's what we're missing. So that's another reason why I like the idea of the food trucks. But I think it's a really important point that the food trucks can come and go, and another one will come in after them very easily. Now, I assume what we're doing here is trying to give the staff some ideas as to come up with an ordinance. Is that correct?
Not so much the ordinance, but just the locations. So I have RC, CR, and C1. The specific requirements for courtyards, there could be some general requirements, and I'll talk with the zoning administrator and maybe the economic development director, and we'll sort of brainstorm as staff to if there are just general requirements that would apply universally, but otherwise, I would suggest that the requirements would show up in the form of the conditions on the conditional use permit for each property that may seek to make use of this use.
But this is a zoning issue, right? So is it eventually going to come back to us?
Yes, it will.
Is it possible to also go back to what we were talking about earlier about is it an accessory use, or the idea of either businesses having their own food truck vehicle, working in conjunction with that, or if it's a different business working in conjunction, but they're still serving the same function. If y'all could put something into writing about so we can clarify for people as to whether they're really doing the right thing or not. I think that would be healthy.
So I guess the delineation there would be the duration and whether or not it's an intended purpose. So for example, like I said, Ice House has Surge, an event or whatever, and then they bring a couple food trucks in because their little kitchen can't handle it, versus the food truck court that is explicitly for and the purpose of. So.
Well, if Ice House owns its private property, they could literally get a courtyard cut just like anybody else could, and that could be their
Yep.
Also,
Well, they're not,
In the longer
they're not
term, it's
in
like
one of
about
those
in the
zones. though.
short run versus with the programs we have now, because we
They
seem
are
to,
not in
the
C1.
statement was that we believe that what is happening is actually allowed. I was just asking to see if we could put something to formalize that a
All the
little
marinas
more.
are supposed to be C1.
They're designated, something different than C1, right?
Well, there was
In the map.
the big, there was some strong feelings about from the marinas, whether or not they should be classified as C or have a special designation. And
It's straight up commercial.
that's
Yeah.
They push
Yeah.
hard on that, yeah.
very,
It's just,
Yeah.
it's just a commercial.
yeah, so all the marinas
That's not-
are considered commercial. now.
Right,
So,
and, I remember we discussed that issue of being somewhat problematic.
mhm,
I think that was before me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, that was part of the comprehensive plan stuff.
Mhm.
I only asked for that staff work because this other exercise we're on may take a little bit of time. So it would be nice if we could
Right.
clarify
So, yeah.
the current activities. or-
Legally,
You are correct, sir, they are C1 designated as marinas,
yes.
so they would fall under that.
There was some strong feelings.
Sure, I'm sure.
With my recollection. So that being the case, I think we've had a thorough discussion. We can move along. So in the interest of being earnest in time.
Can I ask what the next intended steps are? We asked them to do some homework, so it was
So,
Draft amendment.
Draft amendments to the articles for RC, CR, and C1. I don't know off the top of my head which article numbers they are, but
so our next step would be to review the drafts, or,
text
and
amendments.
then the step after that would be a hearing.
Correct.
Okay.
I was just wondering, I hate to throw this in, but could we include the marinas, that area that?
They are
C1.
C1.
Okay,
Yes, it does.
okay,
Yes,
good, okay,
absolutely.
good, good, good.
That was
Awesome.
intentional, yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, so for the first read on the signs, let's just go ahead and not look at cleanups and edits, just have a little bit of this discussion and some color from staff about the flutter flags and attention seeking signs and what the intent of this review is. And we can go back and, as homework, do general cleanup edit stuff. I'm not interested in doing that this evening.
yeah, so the main purpose for opening that article was to remove the prohibition, and it is found in section, I'm sorry,
It's 12-4, page 52.
correct, 12
Page 52 in the packet is 12-8A.
right, 12-8, it's the prohibited sign, and it was in paragraph A. So,
Page 12.
you know, when I was thinking about it, I didn't see a whole lot of difference between rotating signs or the scrolling signs. We have some of those. So the reason I struck that language, and you all don't have to agree with this, but was to make it more closely match what is in town already. But again, in other words, the fluttering signs, rotating, those don't really, they're not as offensive as, for example, something that might produce sound or odor or liquid or something along those lines. So that, for that reason, I left those as prohibited types of signs, but that was just sort of my observation. But the main goal was to remove that word flutter. It just seemed to make some sense to me to strike the rest of that line, but if you all don't agree that,
Okay.
Well, generally speaking, this category, this is a very judgy statement I'm about to make. It's the tackiest of stuff in beach towns, right? It's the stuff that like literally spins or looks like a disco ball, and it's the stuff that's intended because they have sign restrictions on space, right? I can only do something because localities say like, we don't want it to be a gaudy place, like we want, because people live here too, right? That's the general, these beach towns, right? People live here, so it's not just about the tourism thing. So tone it down, don't have a giant sign. And then the workaround for that is that either they're obnoxiously brightly lit, and then they have to get over like lumen sort of arguments with stuff, right? Because they're trying to deal with that, or they actually have some sort of motion aspect to it. that they try to build in, and it's really about trying to draw attention. Essentially, it's trying to cheat the system, right? And I think that's what this is sort of getting around initially, which is like, just because it's only this big, if you make it spin, right, or do something otherwise that's crazy, when you're driving by, you're gonna go, wow, look at that weird thing, right? And that's not really in the character of this place, right? Versus the flutter, it's a flag. To me, it's not, it fits more in the thing about where we say, well, generally speaking, you can have flags, right? It just happens to be a flag that has some advertising on it, which is different to me than what we're talking about in most of this, which is like it's a building with a sign. So I'm just kind of wondering whether we're going towards striking this for the sake of trying to including this flag thing, we're opening up the door to some pretty obnoxious stuff. Like I said, this is, I hate to say this is what you see in, small little resorty places to where it's, it's lucrative. I mean, people don't do that because it's not free, right? It's much cheaper to paint a regular sign than to have this animation stuff, but.
So you're thinking to strike flutter, but not the rest of it?
Yeah, I don't even know it'd be hard to argue what the word flutter even means in most senses as a sign, but the stuff that, it's really that it's later, it's animated, I guess, is, whether it's either
There's some
digitally animated or
There's
physically
specific,
animated.
digital, or there's a lot about the digital or not.
And the limitations and not disallowing of that.
But would that be sufficient if we just said, why in the world is the word flutter there, got rid of flutter, would that solve the people's problems, or do they still have a problem because of
Rotate or
the word
otherwise
move for
purpose.
purposes of attracting attention?
I think or otherwise move is exactly, or
Yeah.
the ones that, the real tall ones,
Yeah.
but they flap in
And
the
they they go up
So
10, 20
for
feet in the
reference,
air.
be like the ones that are Ace Hardware, that are the now open flags that are fluttery,
Mm-hmm.
that's considered what a generic flutter flag would be.
Yes.
But they otherwise move for the purpose of attracting attention, so.
Yeah.
That's why.
But by striking these to allow that seemingly, in my estimation, fairly benign use, will open up the door to some of the stuff that's really obnoxious.
I'm not sure I'd agree with that because all signs are for the purpose of attracting attention. Why else would they put it out? I try to read all the posters as they go by the bulletin board, I can never do it. But the point is, I agree with the recommendation to strike that off.
Okay. And this is primarily driven by the inconsistencies in the code versus what we see around us.
Well, and it was a request of, one of the town council members.
And we see those flags around and we know that they're not permitted. And so I think applying it evenly and consistently is what's important. Whatever we decide.
Correct, whatever you decide. I would, before I forget, I would like to draw your attention to 12-4, paragraph D, and this is at the top of, I guess, page 51.
51, page 51.
Yeah, 12-4, paragraph D.
For non-commercial purposes.
Right, and just so you know, the reason I'm suggesting striking that is because, flags / signs, regulations are supposed to be content neutral. And so you can't regulate commercial speech, like on the side of a bus, for example. You can't allow commercial speech and prohibit political speech. That's actually a case, on buses, for example. So any of your ordinances have to be content neutral. So when I saw this and it said for non-commercial purposes, anyway.
Where are we?
Was it
Page
12?
51, and it's the.
12-4, paragraph D.
Flags of the town, so it's underneath signs excluded from regulation. And the following signs are excluded from regulation under this article.
Because, and the other reason that I felt that that would kind of fix it and not run any risk of being content specific is because if you make the edit that we're talking about in 12-8, then that would solve the issue for flags with a commercial logo or something. That would allow them.
I understand what you're saying about you can't restrict commercial speech, just like you can't restrict private speech, but we do have sign ordinances that sort of say you do have restrictions on commercial speech in terms of the restrictions on where you're allowed to do it. So in that sense, like, you're not allowed to, we say like your signs have to have a certain dimensions, right? You can't paint your entire roof as an entire sign, right? You can't have a
But that
billboard,
is size,
right?
that is regulating size, not content.
Size and placement.
Correct.
Yeah.
Size and place, but not content.
But advertising is restricted in a way that non-advertising things are. I mean, there's commonly restrictions specifically on advertising and for commercial purposes that are not.
Sign ordinances must be content neutral.
So you're saying that you can't allow non-commercial? That's the problem?
You just suppose, the language needs to be content neutral and not speak about political or commercial or non-commercial. It just needs to be content neutral. You can, the reason that the first sentence in here works is because it is government. It is limited to flags of government entities.
I remember a couple years back when we reviewed the sign ordinances, there had been a Supreme Court decision that was very restrictive. And so I guess that's why you're complying with that.
Right.
Or how you're complying.
And this, it's not a blatant, it made me a little bit uneasy. So it seemed to accomplish the same thing just by stopping with the government stuff.
So I'm just looking at some other, this is not Virginia, but Winter Park, Colorado specifically has part of their sign ordinance that specifically regulates what they call feather flags, teardrop flags, or wind flags. And what it does is it limits the sizing to them. Maximum width of 3 feet, maximum height 8 feet, shall not exceed 12 foot from the ground, all that kind of stuff.
And proximity to the road is also key.
So vertical flag signs. So what's the difference between the vertical flag sign?
A vertical flags under, let's see, under section
What page?
is packet page 59, code page 12-11. It's under sign types, which is section 1210. 1210B subset II, if you will, I think it is, or 3 I don't know. Right above section 12-11 is vertical flag signs. Where it says shopping centers are permitted as provided in section 12-7 of this article. And it lists CR, RC, C1, C2, MC. It's permitted on all of those zones. Maximum sign area and height is the same for all of them, 24 square feet and 12 feet high. So that, to me, sounds like kind of covers, if you will, flutter flags.
Yeah.
So we could still strike that entire chunk or even have in that entire chunk, but this still shows that those vertical cloth flags, if you will, are still allowed. They are still a viable entity.
The vertical flags, but
Except for
this
the
is,
fact that the one that you're talking about is temporary versus fixed. So the
Right.
vertical flag is fixed. So if you go back a couple more pages on page 51, under the requirements for temporary signs, which is 12-7, which is what it refers to.
Permanent.
Yeah, so, temporary signs and banners are permitted, provided signs conform to the following provisions.
Mhm.
And so that's, subject to a zoning permit fee. Not more than one sign shall be located on any lot, except when the lot contains multiple establishments. And then one temporary sign or banner shall be permitted for each separately identifiable establishment. So literally, they would have to have one per.
Mhm.
So that's if, between temporary signs, I think this is where it falls. So 6 temporary signs or banners in a calendar year, permitted temporary signs or banners are erected for no more than 30 consecutive days. And no establishment or use may erect more than 6 temporary signs or banners in a calendar year. And then minimum setbacks and right away.
And their signs, they can't exceed 32 square feet, right? Individually, whereas the other is 24. The temporary, right?
Right. So that's, I think that's the other
That's a good
consideration
look at
that we need to make sure we,
How are these handled in other jurisdictions?
well, that's what I was.
So I just did several researches through this. Some have negated the color flag altogether. Norfolk did it in like 2013, 2014 is what I found. Other areas have permitted the color flag, but since it's temporary, they mitigate. You can only do it between like 45 and 60 days out of a 12-month calendar year. So like if you're having a grand opening, a fall special, like you can regulate, I'm only going to do it 15 days out of this month because we're opening new or whatever, but expand to 45 to 60 days on a calendar year. Same specifications as far as size, can't be more than 12 feet, all the stuff that we already have. The problem with that is negating how we regulate that.
Monitor,
It's the setbacks, well, that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Is our, what is it, the
Compliance.
community enhancement
Enhancement
officer.
Uh-huh.
So to me, it's a matter of, you look at the, like I said, specification and adhering to number of signs per establishment,
Right.
duration of signs, and like you said, rotating. It's fine if it's not just the same thing forever. Like, so grand opening, fall special, and you can only have but so many. The important part of this is the setback and the number. So we were talking about making sure that it doesn't become overwhelming and an eyesore because you go and then somebody's got 6 of these things in a 12-foot run that are all just right on top of each other. So, I think we need to put some thought towards that. I mean, I like the general outline here. I'm okay with maybe more than one, but not more than like 2 or so.
Do we either have consensus or at least a majority of us that think we should have them or not have them, or have
Well,
them,
that's what the question
have
is. I
them
mean,
regulate
let's,
them?
yeah. I mean, the banners is something to do with. Have them or not have them.
I think not have them is a bit much, right? But I think regulate. I don't exactly know how yet. I don't know how that works, what the right number is for that. But what I do know is this. 2 restaurants, Washington Avenue, decided to suddenly start using what we're now affectionately referring to as flutter flags. And the look of Washington Avenue went from, okay, could use some improvement, some dolling up, right? To really, it really brought, just the vibe of the street went down.
Yeah.
It felt, it did not feel like what we were trying to do to beautify and make wonderful the town of Colonial Beach. It felt like a detraction. It certainly brought attention to those 2 businesses, but it felt like, to me, and to other folks I spoke to, it felt like somewhat of a detraction from the intent and from the beautification of the town. And then, you know, whether it was at the same time, or those are just ones that I noticed or whatever, they're springing up everywhere. And they're not beautiful, you know, they're not the quaint, you know, wonderful colonial beach town.
Not the attraction.
Well, it seems to me,
Right, they're not an
Yeah.
attraction, they're a detraction.
well, they're not allowed, currently
By
under the
whom
current
they're
zoning.
no.
And they're not attractive, and, you know, a lot of them are placed out onto the road almost, so that they're an obstruction to traffic, or could be. And so, based on the fact that we lack the ability to really monitor, these things, you know, I think that keeping them restricted right now maybe isn't our best interest.
That's not, I think we need to do our own, I think we probably all need to
Go back,
go back
and look
and
at
do a
this,
little homework.
and go check them out, yeah.
And I, like, spatially maybe in town matters too, because
Right,
since it is a passive, it's a non-powered, non-illuminated, it seems kind of like beachy type thing, right? Works well with the sea breeze, but you're right in the middle of the business corridor, it kind of looks like the used car floppy man thing all of a sudden
right.
plopped into the middle of the town, and you go like, that's weird. So maybe we need to think, not town-wide, but maybe in
Where,
zones.
zone it somehow.
Or also, if you designate that water flags are not allowed, we then have the code enforcement.
Well, technically, they're not right now.
Understood, I mean, it's under advisement right now.
Exactly.
Right.
So if the determination is no flutter flag,
Yeah.
then we have the direction where our code enforcement can then go out.
Yeah, and we can offer them, you know, a permanent, to use the permanent, signage. That's still an option for them. I don't know
Sure,
if they want to afford it, but that is
Kind of
available.
a somewhat similar effect.
And
but
more
it's
attractive.
More regulated, more attractive.
Mhm.
Correct. But this provides, you know, we
Guidance.
know there's a problem.
Guidance.
Are we gonna allow it, not allow it? If
Gotcha.
not, then the code enforcement individual can then go, these are not allowed, please remove, you have 30 days, whatever.
Mhm.
But
Gotcha.
that was kind of the discussion of why it was brought to say, are we gonna allow it or not allow it? Because currently it's not allowed and it's happening.
Right.
It's kind of like the food truck thing, right? So it's
Right.
like, we gotta make a stance and say, this is what we need to do, yes or no,
Right.
and then go from there.
Gotcha.
I'm inclined to allow it in certain areas for certain durations and by application, because you're right, from the code enforcement point of view, trying to figure out when somebody put it up, right? The burden has to be on the business owner
Mhm.
to say, here's my application, I'm gonna do it starting this day.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think.
Does that
we
make
all-
sense?
it's-
It
it's-
specifically says by application.
Yeah.
temporary signs, so.
I think, so I think we got the homework we need to do
Yes.
in order to figure out a
Okay.
good plan for that.
I'm good with that. All right, so we will do some research and some consideration and come back and have further discussion on Article 12.
So can we have a broader thing about, like, we recognize the fact that they're not allowed now, but we hope to have some path forward by the beginning of next tourist season, right? So that, like, something is if there is a
You mean
path
to send
forward.
back to town council saying we're looking into, I mean, is that what you mean?
No, to sort of like tell businesses when you go around and go like, hey, it's not allowed now, to go like, but, you know, we're having a dialogue, and we're trying to have this done by the next time, you know, town wakes up.
I think we're still too early for that even. I think we still need to do our research and kind of figure out where we're thinking of going
Mhm.
before we even do that. Because the first question out of their face is gonna be, okay, so what are we gonna be allowed to do?
Yeah,
Well, I would
when you
hope
go
that would
through-
engage them in the dialogue, as opposed to them, it's just supposed to just go like, nope, like, go throw all your stuff away, right? Because then that's not a public engagement thing, right? So that's kind of what I was hoping, is that we could actually get some input that way and give them some time frame, as to say like, don't freak out, we're not making this decision at our next meeting, right? But our intention isn't not to wait until
The other
like
option
middle of
is
next
to
summer.
go to those businesses, there's probably only 4 or 5 in the town. Come state your case on why you should have those,
Mhm.
and then let that be the
if it is.
Side effect.
The one that I've seen the most, or the one that attracted my attention the most, was actually the food trucks on
Yeah.
Town Hill.
Correct. Most
Which,
of those are trying to identify, I'm selling mini donuts, or I'm selling hot dogs, or I'm selling whatever to bring your attention to that establishment. The only other place I've seen it is Ace Hardware
yeah.
Yeah.
on Euclid, and then several on the
Washington.
Washington.
Yeah,
Food trucks, because they can't have signs, right?
Right.
Food truck can't.
They have an A-frame, but that's it.
Yeah.
And most of the time, their sign is, there's a truck.
Yeah.
Right, their vehicle itself is the sign.
yeah.
Right.
Is there an appeal process for the things where we said, no, you can't, I mean, blatantly, you can't have these as it's written out?
BZA, perhaps, right?
Yes, yeah.
A decision, any determination of the zoning administrator, for example, a notice of violation, yeah, the appeal would be.
Okay.
So that's not us, right? So that's just administratively,
Right.
just
No,
what's
that's
handled.
not you, no.
Right.
The appeal would go to the BZA and then potentially to circuit court.
Okay, so we're good on sign ordinance for now?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Can you just read us into, I don't really want to get into a discussion on the subdivision ordinance, but just read into what the intent of it is.
Yes, the intent for the subdivision ordinance was mainly Kaylin and I, when we were looking at some provisions, the one that stood out to us at most was the requirement that 21 copies of a plat be provided. So we don't need or want 21 copies. I'm going to confirm, I also took out the requirement for Mylar because now everything is electronic and then just regular paper. And because of scanning and whatnot, the clerk's office can take the regular paper now. So I did take the liberty of striking Mylar, but I will confirm that that's not needed. I don't think it is, so. No, so typically a set of plans, Public Works needs one, we need one, maybe a couple of others for review. So we brainstormed and thought that instead of 21.6 might do it, so.
That'd be more than enough.
Right, because,
You get it digitally, even better, you just blast a digital copy out.
yes, and
Well, what's
we,
nice is the larger sizes of the plats, and having hard copies of that for staff.
yes, we do, it is helpful to have a few. And like I said, Public Works needs at least one, maybe two, depending on, those folks. Maybe the road people and then the utilities people,
But there's no appetite to do a wholesale revision like we did on the PUD or anything like that at this point.
Not a wholesale revision in that respect, but I did go through the whole thing and, cleaning, it's a cleanup,
Okay.
but not a, rewrite, right?
Okay.
Restructure.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah, we're doing cosmetic surgery, we're not doing open heart surgery.
correct,
Got it.
correct.
Okay, that helps a
Thank
lot,
you.
and that gives us some direction and guidance as we kind of go through this. Does anybody have any committee report updates? No.
I just have a question is it's almost 9 and I would like to not be here forever. However, there's an efficiency in having you here wearing the planning hat as well as wearing the town attorney hat. My understanding is we will lose that efficiency soon. As we're thinking about like I said, I don't really want to stay here, but can you give us some sense of timing and then what happens after you're gone in terms of who staffs us when we say things like, oh, we'd like to change it to 6 copies? What's the burden going to be on us for dealing with temporary staff as opposed to just
So your
knocking
zoning,
this out now?
so Kaylin will be here and she knows your ordinances inside and out. Your zoning administrator will be here and she is excellent and has done this a long time and knows the law, also. The town will have legal counsel. I doubt they will, outside legal counsel from my firm that I was with, I doubt they will request that counsel attend planning commission meetings, but could be available for legal questions, definitely. So, but you're in very good hands with the zoning administrator, and she could not be here with us tonight, and that was completely unexpected. But
I was wondering.
on a yeah, that was totally unexpected. She had every intention of being here tonight. She's on the phone. So, but,
Hi, darling.
right, she's listening in and probably watching, I think, also on YouTube. But again, that was completely unexpected. But, yes, she will be here as well. So you're in very good hands again in that respect, because she knows the law also. And like I said, Kaylin here knows your ordinances inside and out. So, but you have access. You know, if you have legal questions, they can certainly follow up.
So at a practical
Oh, and-
efficiency level, is it just related to these things about applicant requirements? Is there an efficiency in just spending 5 minutes on this with you here versus whatever this other process is gonna be?
And I'm sorry, what was?
What's the burden of going through this? I mean, you were kind of feeling like, let's just deal with this another time. Because it sounds like you were saying that these changes are pretty.
Oh, and that's what I was gonna, I didn't answer the other part of
in
your
terms of
question.
substance.
So I will be with the town through, November 11th. Yes, November 11th. And then I will, after that, I will still be, residing in town for a while. So I can be a volunteer.
Would you be interested in joining the planning commission? That would be awesome.
I'm not a resident, so
Oh, you're not.
I couldn't be, because I never changed my residency, even though I stay here. So, but I don't qualify as a resident, so that would not be permitted. But thank you.
So Bernie's,
First glance made it look to me like most of what we were dealing with here is kind of administrative, just edits to what it is, and nothing really deep in the weeds.
It's not,
Well,
and
there's a
you
lot
see,
to it, though.
you see all the red in the definition part? That is because, and that's something that we see in the other parts of the ordinances as well. And so in the definitions, I tried to stick with the terms that you had, but as you will see your other articles come through, a lot of times in your articles, the town code, town zoning ordinances don't use the terms that you have defined. They use terms that mean kind of the same thing, and we kind of all know what was meant, but they don't use those terms of art that were defined. And the same thing happened here. So these changes, I don't think are substantive. They are to use the terms that you have set out there and to make those match the provisions that you see later in your subdivision ordinance. It was tying that together, but not substantive changes. I think that's
But
what
we'll
you'll
have
see.
plenty of time to discuss all that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's what you'll see though. There, it is a lot of red, but I don't think you'll see that it is changing the substance that's there. It's just making it match.
Okay. In administrative items, has there been a applicant for the planning commission?
No, and just a reminder that you still have a vacancy and, we did, yeah, this question came up. So, the planning commission can include one member of staff. So, that hasn't happened. So
Just so
anyway,
you're aware, I have talked to at least 2 people that are interested in joining the planning commission, but they had other priorities that weren't allowing them to apply yet. So I anticipate someone applying, at least one of the 2 applying within the next month or so to the planning
And
commission.
I've been out working the groups to see if we can get, volunteers also. And I have one lady that said she was interested, but, not here tonight, so.
we have a plethora of people
Yeah.
applying for public service, all of which you can't fit in the available slots. So, so hopefully that, if they truly are interested in serving the town, maybe some of those folks.
Yeah, I think that they
Qualify
should be
together.
here, and observe some of the meetings.
That'd be a good start.
Have these people that you've spoken to been witness to our marathon sessions?
Yes.
And they're still willing? Good,
They
awesome.
seem to be interested in joining
The marathon club.
All right.
Cool.
Or maybe
Awesome.
they're
Even better.
interested in curtailing them and we can go home early.
I would love that too, either way.
Either way.
All right. Commission and FOIA training.
Yes.
Actually, if I can back up the committee reports thing you asked me about, I talked about a different topic. So, on the resiliency piece, and I don't know whether this is our resiliency committee or the town or whatever, but there has been interest from the folks that help facilitate the RAF process in maybe coming back. We begged and pleaded to say, like, could you maybe give us a freebie because we've had so much turnover. There was hopefully going to be a discussion with the town manager and the grant writer and other people to try to figure out whether we could get together. I don't think any of that's happened. So if there's a way to, I know Robin's been engaged on this, but we haven't seen analogous administration, the career staff folks following suit. So we just awkwardly have because they came back and said, yes, when would you like to do it? And we're kind of going like, soon, but we don't really know who's in charge of this beast. And all I know is I'm a player, but I'm not in charge. So I don't know how that gets conveyed back to the powers that be, but we have an outstanding.
Last JC.
Yeah, I'm sorry that, he, wasn't able to stay, but very much wanted to hear from him,
He said he would sort of do the grant update piece and talk about grants, right? But it's a bigger dialogue than that,
Yes.
which means that we need to have several entities engaged and so it's partial good news, right? Folks are willing to help us a little bit more for free, but we got to play ball.
If I would have known that that was his intent, we could have
Exactly.
put that
Yeah,
earlier.
so maybe you could convey that to him, that we're flexible,
Yeah,
He's just not used to our marathons.
Okay.
And the other thing I guess that's relevant, and I'll try to reach out to our mayor, because I'd offered to help her write some letters that relate to some of the problems with the FEMA programs, is the governor has proposed killing the
Carbon initiative?
that funds the $30 million pot that we're not ready to go grab that yet, but it's 30 million and growing. And so another year from now would be another like 20 million or more than that. So it's producing apparently giant resources that the current governor is talking about killing it before we actually be in a place to apply for some of that money. So, and I think that my recommendation would be the town sort of would write back and say, no, we're not in favor of never having received any of that money.
And it might require legislative action, and the governor may not be able to rescind that, so we can always hope. Because that's a pocket of money and a deep resource that we could use here. The carbon initiative, it's 30 million and gaining each year. And other jurisdictions are really, getting a lot of resources from that, a lot of grants. And we could apply as well. But Governor Youngkin is.
It primarily funds two functions. One I think is education related. The other one is primarily relate with things that relate to flooding and coastal storms and that sort of stuff. It's really completely in our wheelhouse. So
Yes.
It lines up well with, we should be a recipient of what we've meant for, presuming it doesn't all get killed before we get a chance to apply.
And other states are utilizing it very well, so.
So anyhow, that's about it for resiliency at the moment.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Potentially awesome stuff, but the current nothing happening.
It's like, there's nothing really-
Yeah.
So commission and FOIA training?
So, I've spoken with the town manager about, the VCU training, is not going to be held again until next spring. But I spoke with the town manager, and I also spoke with, a friend who teaches, a colleague who teaches in that. And it is possible that they will come here if you're interested in that. And I had offered to do FOIA training, and I will still do that regardless of whether it's before or after November 14th. So if you all would like to do that, if I could get an idea of like days that work, or if you would be willing to do that and would like to do that and have these people come here and we could possibly do both together. Is that something you're interested in?
When you say together, you mean staff and the commission?
When I say together, I'm talking about the people coming from VCU to do the planning commission training, and then I would do like an hour of.
Is it the training or certification?
It's a training.
Okay.
It's a training.
And what's the time commitment we're talking about? Is it an afternoon? Is it a full day or?
I'll have to find out, but it's gonna be the vast majority of a day. I would set aside a day, and if we can wrap up early, then so be it. But if you say Fridays work well, or I don't even wanna think about this until February, or any sort of, and you don't have to answer tonight, of course, but, just any sort of guidance that you think that we could, so I'll reach out to these folks with the VCU program, but that's gonna be the first question is, when are you thinking, and that sort of thing. And maybe we start with, I'll get some dates from them. But I wanted to just bring this to you to see what your thoughts were about it, if it's something you're even interested in us reaching out about. If
Currently.
I did talk with the town manager.
Without a grant, or?
I talked with the town manager about this possibility, and there is a cost to it, but she seemed to think that we had some money that we could do that.
Well, currently, my best available weekdays, as of now, are Wednesdays,
Okay.
but with enough advanced planning, I can usually move things around on other days.
Okay.
Wednesdays work for me.
I seem to remember getting an email from, names escape me. Our wonderful council person, Seth Sullivan. Mrs. Sullivan.
Yes.
That there is an online course about FOIA. So is that similar to this training, or?
FOIA Council has an online course, and it is it checks the box. It fits the bill for folks who are required. I don't think, and I need to go back and double check, but I don't think you're in the required group for FOIA training. But it is absolutely a good idea, because you are a public body and you are 100% subject to FOIA.
I
So
think she was suggesting it for the.
yes, exactly. So yes, they have an online training, and you're absolutely welcome to do that. The reason, and I started doing personalized FOIA training when I was with Sands Anderson, is just because we, right, and I think it's a good idea to do both, the personalized, like I was doing, but also the generic online version, because that gives you sort of the rules, the law, that sort of thing, which I also revisit. But then I talk about, and okay, here in Colonial Beach, if you have a FOIA request, or what happens, it starts with Heather, and we walk through the procedures and the process that is specific to Colonial Beach, and the things that we see and that sort of thing. So we tailor it and take it a little bit further, and talk about your locality.
How many hours is typical in the training you do?
Mine, it's for FOIA 1. And so I usually do FOIA and COIA together, because the COIA is the Conflict of Interest Act, and each one being about an hour. But we can do COIA if you want, but that's not as much of an issue for you, because you don't vote on money things. It would have impacted you, the conflict of interest, if, and this is sort of obvious, but like, for example, if you were asking for a rezoning of your own property. So it's the obvious ones that impact a planning commission, whereas town council, votes on money things. So it's a little bit different, but I'm happy to do it. It's not the most fun thing you can do on a day, but I'm happy to do it.
I'm interested in the FOIA training as well, particularly if it's that short and you can squeeze it in while you're still around. That would be great.
Yeah.
And
we don't have to do it. I can just do that. If y'all want to just do that one day, we can do that as well. So, with your guidance, if you want to do it before a planning commission meeting or on a different day completely, that's fine. I just thought if we were going to be gathering for this planning commission stuff, we could tack on an hour for the FOIA, but it doesn't have to be together. It's just an idea.
Like it. I'd also reached out to the VC, and I'm interested in them. Like, if they'll come to me, it's always preferable to me going to them, assuming that there's not a big cost swing. But the dates of the next, I think they call it the Certified Planning Commissioner Program.
Yeah.
The dates of the 109th version, I can't believe they've had that many of these, is January 30th and 31st. So,
I didn't realize they were
We'd have to
having
wait.
that close. Okay.
well, they've been kicking the can on this. I've been asking this question for months, right? And they keep not answering. They finally answered this week. So,
Well, they didn't have a session in September.
they had one in September.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you usually do like in spring and fall.
Yeah, yeah. So, Actually,
And that's fine, but as we talked about it, India and I, as we were talking about it, you know, it was just, we basically thought it's something that we should offer to everybody. And if that's the case, then like you said, maybe it's just easier if they come here. So that was kind of the idea.
Yeah, I think it's like 2 days of in-person and then a couple of weeks and then some sort of a wrap-up class or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's kind of bookended, but in between, you've got a couple of reading assignments and have to go visit another jurisdiction.
And the first session
and
It's separated by 6 or so weeks before the second session.
at least, yeah.
And maybe the traveling one might be an abbreviated version of that. And maybe that's why it's not maybe the certified one. So, but
Well, it's in our
We just-
bylaws that you, as a planning commissioner, you're
Yes.
supposed to get the certification.
yes, so we need to follow up on that. So again, if you want to do it, we can follow up if that's something you're interested in, is really the status for tonight.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Okay,
And I'm sure whoever our vacancy fill
Would
slot
benefit.
person would benefit.
Yeah.
yes.
That would be great timing.
So,
So my understanding, if I remember my own thing, is we have to get applicants, this body approves just one, or do we send forward a slate? I know it was just one when I went through it, but do we ever, is it?
it has
do we
been
have to-
multiple, but
Yes.
typically what we'll do is we'll put forth a recommendation to council. And then they can say yea or nay, and then, but typically the multiple applicants are sorted through at this level.
And last time we set a deadline, we put a public announcement out there, and then we set a deadline well enough in advance that people that were interested could apply, and then we reviewed them all together.
So that may be some good feedback for your folks that are interested. If they're thinking,
Yeah,
not now, but soon, then they should probably start the process now, because it may take a
Yeah.
few months.
and, you know, again,
Also first.
being here,
They
participating.
were out of town for vacation for a month.
Month, that's a bit, that's right. It's like-
They're retired, so I mean, they're going out to visit family for.
That's good, yeah.
Retired's perfect. Retired people have all kinds of time, don't they?
Yeah.
Especially in this town.
So I think we pretty much hashed over the district amendments for general cleanup and incorporation and
Yes.
mobile and vending.
That's just an indication of what's coming. I always like to let you know what's coming down the pike, and so now it will be on your recommendation, the district edits.
On the administrative part, I asked a question, I think you were gonna go back to India to ask were about support that the body has in addition to sort of the assigned, we get a staff person by the rules, but sometimes there might be extra capacity beyond that. And do we have a budget, or how do we request a budget? Like, did you give any clarity as to how that works so that we understand moving forward into the future, how that process works in terms of, is there an existing sort of capacity piggy bank that we can work from? And if it isn't, what the process with that would be?
You would
in an
request-
Existing budget year.
You would request from town council that they add a planning commission budget to the budget, a planning commission. So there's a planning department budget, which is, pays salaries and advertising and,
But if there's something specific, we can petition staff and by proxy council. For example, when we did the comprehensive plan.
Right, that's what I'm trying to figure out, like, what was that mechanism?
So
How did
there's,
that- how did that-
it's,
And,
we would petition staff and or council depending on what it is and how big the ask was.
And that question came up when we were reviewing the budget that we put together for our last budget round. And so I think at that point, we did have a budget that India had. I think each training was about $500. So,
Right, so
Yeah.
yeah, there was definitely some
Yeah.
earmarked for training,
Training,
but as
yes.
far as resources beyond that, I
Yeah.
don't believe that anything's been earmarked. It's just a general fund allocation at this point. Because we don't have a dedicated slot on the budgetary line items. So, that. Can I get a motion? to
I
adjourn?
would like to move to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. We're adjourned. Thank you. We'll make sure. Everybody wants to hang out anymore.
Oh, yes. Yes.
everything else.
Yeah.